Hello everyone and welcome to This Nintendo Life, episode 270, kind of. My name is NBZ and I am here joined by absolutely nobody. Joined by you, the person at home listening to this. Maybe you're on a bus, maybe you're on a train, but it's just a conversation between me and you, the person listening. So, what's happening? So, Bali moved house, very cool, very fun. Also went on holiday. Me didn't move house, but also not going on holiday, but also going on a plane. I'm going to GDC, the Games Developers Conference, in San Francisco. Barely like to say my favorite place in the world now. San Francisco is good, LA is bad. That's the distinction there. I do actually like San Francisco, but means that there's once again we have a bit of a weird timey-wimey clash going on with recording and all that good stuff. So what we have for you here today is me. I'm going to talk to you about some stuff, and then we're going to go into a Patreon episode. So, you know, we obviously do those Patreon episodes if you are subscribed to that, and you get those on a monthly basis. And we thought, hey, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is the hot topic right now. A lot of people are talking about it, and we did an episode on it. We did like a good hour and a half episode, and I thought, hey, what if I put that on the end of this? And I talk to you now about some other stuff. And that kind of is an episode. Hopefully gives you a little peek into what we do on the Patreon side of things. Maybe get you interested in that stuff. But then also give you a little bit of current stuff that I have been checking out as well. Which, to be fair, is not a huge amount. Been very busy, but been dipping into some things here and there. But that's what's going to happen on this episode. Also, if you would like to write into the show, because we haven't done emails in a little while, we'd love to get some more in. You can email ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That's ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com, and you can tell us things, and we'll read them on the show. And it'll be a good, fun time for everybody involved. But let's begin, ladies and gentlemen, this intimate conversation. I used to do this all the time, right? Because, you know, when you're making YouTube videos, it's like, especially when I did narrated Pokemon stuff, I'm like, look, here's the funny thing about internet content, is it is very much a solo endeavor from the consumption side of things. Like, you are one person, I'm speaking to an audience, right? I'm speaking to an audience of hundreds, maybe thousands of people, but you're just one person. Something, you might be sitting in front of a computer, eating some food, you might be on a bike, doing a ride, you might be in a car, all that good stuff. And so let's take it. It's like a fireside chat situation here. So let me tell you about a couple of little things I've been playing on the old Nintendo Switch. Oh, one thing I want to call out, actually. All these rumors going around about the Switch 2's coming next year now and all that sort of stuff. And, disappointing to some degree. But for me, I'm actually kind of happy in some senses, because it means that I feel more justified in having spent an additional £300 on a second Nintendo Switch, because, the OLED is beautiful. It's so good. And a couple of games we're going to talk about today are OLED pilled, let's say, which means that, hey, if you play them on the OLED, they're going to be better. And they just look nicer. And one in particular may be the best looking Switch game ever made, but we'll get into it. So I just want to say Switch OLED is great. That said, I am betraying it and probably leaving it behind and not taking it on the plane, but we'll see. I'll chat about that at the end. But let's start off with a demo that released for Princess Peach Showtime. I believe it is Princess Peach Showtime, not Princess Peach's Showtime or anything that involves having apostrophes. I think it's one of those Nintendo branding things, right? Like, you got to say just the name and you can't have things added onto the end. And I should say, if we were to talk about actual Nintendo approaches to these things, the Princess Peach Showtime game demo, which was released, and I was quite curious about. I've been very interested in this game, I think, generally. Looking at its first appearance, it was like, what is this going to be? Is it going to be a platformer? Is it going to be an action game? And it turns out that it is kind of lots of different genres, right? I think that was the thing that excited me a little bit about it, because Peach having all these different costumes, having all these different styles of gameplay. There's detective stuff going on. You're being a ninja. You're using swords. Like that. It seemed like it had a lot going for it, which is cool. So I booted it up on the OLED. It looks very nice on there. I've heard a lot of people complaining about this game's performance. Maybe playing it handheld, just it didn't bother me as much. I tend to find that when you play things handheld, 30 frames per second, at least to me, feels less worse than it does on a big screen. I definitely found this to be the case when I was playing Infinite Wealth on my Steam Deck, because that couldn't fully do it at 60, so I had to cut it down. But it still looked great and ran really well, so maybe that's the case there, because I've heard a lot of people complaining about it. But weirdly enough, I didn't find to have too many issues with it. So I booted it up, started playing through, and it's interesting. I think there is a degree to which a lot of Nintendo games, right? Nintendo are the masters, kind of like Disney, of approaching a game and saying, okay, so this has a wide appeal. It's going to appeal to young children. It's going to appeal to adults. It's going to appeal to as many people as we can, the people who grew up with our games, the people who are just getting into our games. And there are going to be levels and approaches for each of those types of players. So with Mario Wonder, for example, if you're just a baby, if you're a 3-year-old playing Mario Wonder, you can play as Nabbit, or you can play as it's the Yoshis actually in Wonder, isn't it? All the different Yoshis are the ones that are invincible, and you just don't die, and you can just run through, and you'll never lose any lives or whatever. Or you can play as another character and just go for the hardest challenges possible and try and get every star coin, all that sort of stuff. And that's the challenging experience, right? Like that very final level of Mario Wonder. It's kind of a masochist paradise, I would say. So you have the gamut being run here. People who grew up with Mario and want that hardcore platforming challenge, but also people who are just children, or people playing with families, and they can get through it equally and still have a really good time because the polish is there and the level design is there, and it all kind of gets this quality bar I think Nintendo are quite good at for the most part. I think the interesting part about Princess Peach Showtime is, in many ways, it feels like it's not talking down to an audience, but it is saying, hey, this is a very easy entry point. And it doesn't quite seem so far, at least from the demo, to have the hooks in there for people like you and me, right? People who listen to Nintendo podcasts, people who play everything that Nintendo puts out and likes all their series and all that sort of stuff, who are looking for a gameplay experience that is not going to challenge us necessarily, but is going to kind of make us think, is going to give us a little bit of that pushback. And so far it feels like this game doesn't do that, or at least in the opening act, which is appropriate because it was all kind of based around the stage play theming, is not as interested in. So the first level is a kind of sword fighting level where you play as Fencing Peach. And the funny thing I found is there is a bit of a connection, not back to the DS Princess Peach game, but that era of handheld, and specifically the Game Boy Advance, because fundamentally this is a 2-button game. You move Peach around the screen, and one button is used to attack, and the other button is used to get out the way. And in some cases, when enemies attack you, to do a slow motion, almost character action game, like Bayonetta dodge, that puts you into a position behind them where you can then attack them. And I found this interesting because, to begin with, I didn't really understand what it was wanting from me. And then I realized, like, okay, this boss is going to do this slam on the ground, and it's going to create a wave, and I just have to dodge into the wave, which basically means I will go into a animation that will then jump me all the way over and be able to hit the guy in the back. And yeah, I would say there is not a lot of challenge going on there. I think it feels okay. It feels decent. It doesn't have the same kind of beautiful magic of a Metroid Dread. I mean, what does really one of the best feeling games ever made. But, even Mario Wonder, I think, had a bit more of a, clear platforming feel to it. This is okay. Like, it feels decent to move around. And initially, when you're Peach, you just have your kind of ribbon attack. There's a little bit of depth perception issues, where, like, you're trying to angle Peach at a character, and getting that angle exactly precise probably would have been better on 3DS, if I'm honest. I'm always going back and talking about the heyday of 3DS and how great it was for stuff like Mario 3D Land, a game that really benefited from the stereoscopic 3D because it allowed you to kind of precisely have those platforming challenges undertaken, and partially why I prefer 3D Land to 3D World in the end. A lot of other reasons why, but yeah, it does feel like sometimes that the angle on those ribbon attacks, playing as Peach, can be a little bit off kilter. So it's okay. I think it's So far to me, the kind of vibe I'm getting from this game is, yes, it's very much built for a younger audience, and it has charm, though. It does still have a lot of charm, and I think that is the thing that may make me want to go and pick it up, is that there is a lot of variety that's going to be on display here. And, there's every chance that later in the game it becomes a bit more kind of involved, and that there is a lot more going on, and you are going to have to be a bit more precise and specific and understand some of the mechanics a bit more. But I think when you fundamentally have this system of 2-button gameplay, it makes it a lot harder, I think. And not to say that all games on the Game Boy Advance were basic and simple and easy to do, but yeah, there's definitely, I think, with a modern 3D game like this, it feels like you are really trying to just pare this down to its core essentials, and make it a bit more approachable. I do think that, like, as I said, it is a very pretty game. Like, there's a lot of charm in the little animations of Peach, like, transforming and collecting things, and there's a satisfaction to all the sound design and the music, and all that sort of stuff is really, well put together, is what you would expect is a super polished product from a first-party Nintendo studio. Actually not sure who's going to be developing or who is developing this game. It's one of those things Nintendo have done lately, is they just don't tell you, which I find frankly a little bizarre and a little insulting, if I'm honest, to the people who make these games, right? Like, these studios put so much time, effort, work into these things, and then Nintendo are like, oh, it was magic. It was just, it just came out of nowhere. And then you find out, like, once someone has leaked the game early and people go into the credits and they're like, oh, it was Grezzo who did that, or oh, it was a studio who you haven't heard before. I think that is... It's important to tell people. I think the thing is, most people don't care. Most people who play Switch just think, oh, the conglomerate, the big Nintendo, they just make games, and all the games are made from Nintendo. It was an issue, I think, back in the NES days, where people were like, oh, Castlevania's and Nintendo game, right? They call them Nintendo games as if they're made by the company themselves. I would like to know who's involved in this. I feel like some people are saying Goodfield have not worked with Nintendo in a long time. I think Crafted World was the last thing they did, and Goodfield have been off doing their own thing for a little while now. They just released a Goemon game, I believe, or a Goemon adjacent game that is in Japanese only, that I've had my eye on and seems pretty cool. Would like to check that out one day. It through some means, which are seemingly those means are getting harder to do as time goes on, as Nintendo and that whole Yuzu situation, which I don't think we really talked about on the show, but is an interesting one of, that emulator getting shut down and then Citra being shut down as a result, which I think is a bit of a travesty, given that Nintendo literally gives you no way to get 3DS games anymore. So shutting down a 3DS emulator is kind of a byproduct of what they're doing with Yuzu, but like it still sucks from a preservation perspective. Like, absolutely horrendous stuff. But I guess back to Peach. So the first level is very much a sword fighting, fencing thing. It's fun. It's light. It doesn't require a lot of thought. There is a little bit of secret hunting in there. Like, you can find like platforms to stand on, and you press them, and you go down to a little secret area, and you find some stuff. It does have the green star or the star coin thing where you will find those in the levels. There was actually one that I missed at the beginning, so there's definitely some stuff for you in there. But I think so far, at the very beginning, it's hard to tell. And I don't want to judge it too harshly yet, because, again, it's the first 2 levels the game is showing. But it just doesn't feel like it's gonna get there. So I'm very curious to how it reviews, and I would like to check it out at some point. To me, it almost feels like a game that I will buy in 6 years' time, when Nintendo are about to shut down the Switch eShop, and I'm looking through the catalog and I'm like, what are the hidden gems, the things that I never played? Maybe that's when I get it. Maybe I do play it early, because if I'm honest, I also have one of those Switch vouchers. I got it for Tears of the Kingdom, because Tears of the Kingdom was stupid expensive. So I did the Switch voucher on the eShop. I have a second voucher. That voucher's going to expire in May. So I have to use it on something. So maybe I use it on this game. The second level is a kind of cooking game. It really feels like they are pulling from the Mario Party playbook, and I think that's what scares me. That's the thing that I am the most worried about for the rest of this game. Is the controls are definitely a step above what a Mario Party would give you, but they're not a far cry above, I would say. Like, there is this cooking kind of baking thing is very much like, okay, I'm going to hold down a button. It reminds me of the balloon minigame where you blow up the balloon in Mario Party. But you're holding down a button and then you're letting go to make sure it doesn't like blow up, essentially. You're kind of creating these giant cake cookie things and the pastry is blowing up and you want to precisely press it and stop it at the right time so that it doesn't go crazy in your face. And then you're also just like using cream on top of cakes and you see patterns, you have to copy the pattern. There is a distinctive Mario Party feel to the design of these sections that like I wish it had a bit more nuance to it. I feel like it feels like you're repeating the same task again and again, and they're like, okay, we're gonna make however many of these cookies, how many can you make within the time limit? And it feels like, yeah, you're counting down to a minute, you're gonna hold down the button until you get as many as you can. I think that's the part of it that makes me think, okay, some of these will just feel like duds and then others will feel a lot better. And I think the question is, how many times do these games repeat, right? Like how often, how long is this game really, right? Are you going to be doing 3 different levels as the fencing Peach? Because there's like 15 different Peaches or costumes that she can use. So there's a lot of potential for variety there. Question is, do they build on that, right? Doesn't seem like a Galaxy situation where they're like, oh, here's every level's a new idea, or Galaxy 2, I should say. It feels like we have these ideas. How many times do we repeat them, and how complex they get before we feel like we run out of juice? So we'll see. I think that there's a bit of hesitation I have around this game now, and I don't know if releasing this demo was necessarily the best idea, because I probably would have bought it sight unseen otherwise. And now I'm definitely I'm holding back a little bit. But I do want to check it out. I do think that, they give you a bit of a trailer at the end, and I'm like, oh, there are some fun things in here. Like, it looks like there's going to be a good amount of, at least, variety. And whether that variety is actually quality is the question at the end of the day. But, I enjoyed myself enough. It was a breezy, fun enough time. And, yeah, maybe I should use that voucher and pick up Princess Peach Showtime when it comes out, which will be... Oh, by the time that this episode comes out, it should already be out, I think. So, hey, you'll know better than me. So, see what happens there. Okay. Other thing I have been playing is the other demo that got released, that I wanted to talk about previously, but just have not had much time to get around to. And I've only put a couple hours in, which really is just barely scratching the surface. But it is the demo for Unicorn Overlord. Unicorn Overlord, I think, was revealed a little while ago in a Nintendo Direct. This is the follow-up to 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim. Not an actual follow-up, just the next game from that studio, Vanillaware. Vanillaware, long history, storied studio, most well-known, really, for their gorgeous artwork. And in a lot of ways, like, giant honkers and large asses. I think mostly in the realm of Dragon's Crown. Dragon's Crown was the game where you look at that character design and you're like, you just kind of like went onto Pornhub and just like took 2 steps to the left, really. Like, we're pretty much adjacent to those websites when it comes to character design. I think just like Dragon's Crown in particular is a very off-putting game in that sense. But their artwork, their art design, just like the quality of the art is outstanding, even in Dragon's Crown. And I feel like 13 Sentinels was a good step in a better direction. You still have that, and Unicorn Overlord definitely still has that. But I think it's a much better direction than they have done in the past. So Vanillaware, mainly I am familiar because I played 13 Sentinels, which, if you don't know, is a narrative game that is kind of has a lot of different characters, and you can tackle the narrative in a variety of ways. There's 13 characters, right? And you choose which ones you want to do the story of, and somehow doing these disconnected stories, they all come together no matter what order you do them in. It's very, very well made, and it also has a really fun, like, tactics, light kind of gameplay segment to it, where you're in these mechs and you're pausing, you're unpausing, and you're blowing stuff up. And I think the gameplay aspect of 13 Sentinels was one of those things that a lot of people were detractors of. I personally enjoyed it. I thought it was a good time. It was pretty easy, but it was a fun thing to do to kind of break up the pace of the visual novel segments. But yeah, I do want to check out Odin Sphere, which is a old Vanillaware game, one of their first, and Odin Sphere has an interesting reputation. I think a lot of people do like it. Dragon's Crown, again, I think character design aside, it's a side-scrolling beat-em-up, really, at the end of the day. It's kind of a side-scrolling action game, and I'm not that into those. If you listen to this podcast enough, you'll know that neither Bally or I are really into that type of game. So, yeah, I was very curious to see how they followed up 13 Sentinels, because, the strengths of that game were really narrative and less mechanical, unless you want to count, like, the structuring of the narrative and the dialogue as mechanical in itself, which I could see an argument for. But Unicorn Overlord it's the thing that I actually really like about the studio, is that everything that they do is distinctly different from their previous work, both in terms of aesthetic and tone and era, right? They've gone from a sci-fi narrative visual novel to a traditional fantasy, medieval, ogre battle inspired, Fire Emblem inspired tactics game, crunchy tactics game, where so far in my couple of hours, it definitely seems like a lot of the focus is on depth of systems, on complex menus and things going on, and really interesting systematical interactions, as opposed to narrative. Now, narrative is still here, it's present, but I would say it feels a bit more traditional. It feels a little less kind of subversive as 13 Sentinels was. And maybe it's a little bit of a shame, because I do think that they had a lot of strength in that style of storytelling. But I do think that the kind of narrative hooks so far are quite cool. I think it opens really strongly. It opens with kind of a flashback to a queen defending her kingdom and, a child being sent away. And it just kind of like throws you in. It's like, holy shit, we've got 6 people versus 6 people. Look at all these things happening on screen. You have no idea what's going on, no understanding of the combat, but it looks cool. And I think, like, one of the most distinctive things about this game is how fucking gorgeous it is. Absolutely astonishing. When I booted this up and watched the intro movie on my OLED, I thought, Jesus Christ, this doesn't get better. Like, there are many good-looking games on Switch, and it's this year especially, between this and Prince of Persia, I mean, third-party developers are knocking it out of the park on a system that, should have been out of our hands with a successor by this point, I think, by a lot of people's desires, but it is really mind-blowing how pretty this game is. It just, the artwork is stunning, the quality of the animations and combat, like, there is each dripping in style. The menus are rich with just animation and, like, saving, even the kind of clockwork way in which you flick to the yes button to save. Like, it just is pouring with that stuff. And I think there are, obviously this is published by Atlas, and so there is a little bit of a connection there to Persona. Not that Atlas was involved with the development, but Vanillaware are really getting a bit of an understanding of, what that team does, which I think is very cool. Yeah, absolutely amazing. And I think just, getting into it to begin with was so easy, because it's so pretty to look at that you're kind of swept away in it, and you hear the music and the story is happening, and this kind of big battle is going on, and then they do and yes, it was a great continent split into 5, and one guy came and took over it all, and the young prince who was saved from the kingdom has to now build up his band of mercenaries and, take on the empire. To be honest, it is a very traditional take on this narrative. You've seen it in plenty of Fire Emblem games, plenty of games, war stories in this kind of genre niche. It's not breaking new ground, but I do think what is there so far, from a voice acting perspective, from a writing perspective, it's all very good. Some folks were chatting about this versus Fire Emblem Engage in Discord, and yeah, I'm very much on the side of, like, Engage's story is just so abysmally bad that, as much as the mechanical stuff does have a lot of quality to it, I think, if you don't have that world, if you don't have that belief, if you don't have that kind of investment, it's a lot harder to stay connected to. And in this game, while not breaking ground, I feel invested in it already. I do like a lot of the characters that we have, and I'm interested to see where things go. But the real depth here comes down to the combat and the way that it works. Now, I've never played any of the Ogre Battle games. I've mainly heard James Jones on RFN talk about Ogre Battle 64 and how many times he's played that game and his love for it. And I I've always been interested, curious about it, but I just didn't. I feel like there's a real-time element to it that I feel a little bit detached from, as someone who likes tiles, who likes Fire Emblem, who likes kind of just thinking about things and not having things happen for me. But I do think there's something about this that has grabbed a part of my brain that is very cool. So you basically have these groups of units, right? And you have up to 6 units in this group, and this group is represented on the map as a set of characters, but they're kind of like a circle. You can move them around independently of each other, so you can have multiple groups of these up to 6 characters. At the very beginning in tutorialization, they only let you use 1 or 2 units in one of those groups, and I think over time they will unlock, and eventually you'll be able to have a full 6 units as a stack, and that's where the kind of end game stuff will lie. But for now, they start you off very simply, kind of just explaining it, and the way that it works essentially is that you move these, you don't move characters, you click a character or you click a group and you say, okay, I want you to go towards here. And then you unpause and they start moving towards the location you've set. Now, enemies will also move at the same time. And so if one of your groups enters an enemy group, they will automatically start to engage in combat. And it'll bring up a screen. It'll be like, okay, here is the prediction of what will happen. It is basically Fire Emblem, but in this case, it is telling you exactly what the outcome is going to be. How much health you'll have, how much health they'll have. And the health is a combination of all the units you have. And so sometimes it's a little tricky. The one thing I find a little tricky to understand is, how do I know if one of my units is actually going to die? So I might be able to defeat this unit, but I'll be like right at the edge of death here. How do I know which unit that's going to be, and all that sort of stuff? Maybe there's some stuff in there that I can figure out later on, but for now, that's the thing that I'm finding a little bit more tricky. But you basically don't have control over what happens in the fight. The fight will happen, and it is dependent upon your setup, how you have set up these 6 characters. So it's a front row of 3 and a back row of 3. And the front row is reserved for characters like warriors who will defend. So when they take damage, they don't take a lot of damage, and they're mainly guarding people at the back. So it is a kind of front row guarding, back row kind of frail characters perspective, where you could have a ranger, an archer at the back, and that archer can kind of fire from behind, but then not get hit, don't take the brunt of a hit. There's a thief, and the thief has such high evasion that you want to put them at the front because there's no chance that they're going to get hit. However, and this is just from a fight I just did, if you have an archer will hit no matter what. So it's kind of like, there's a weakness and a strength system here, but if you have a thief up front and you're fighting against a group of units that have archers, it's a bad idea. So you don't want to engage that group with this group. And so it really comes down to this tailoring of, okay, I'm going to have this one group. It has a warrior up front and it has a thief up front, but it has a lancer in the back, and it also has an archer in the back. And the lancer is really cool because they will hit both enemies in the row because their spear is long. So it kind of like goes through and hits both. But that's only if the 2 enemies are standing on back-to-back tiles. And something the game teaches you early on is like, if you have someone behind someone else directly and you're fighting lancers, before the battle starts, you should probably move that other person to the right or to the left so that when the lance goes through, it only hits one of the units and not 2. But you still retain the back row status of being a little bit protected. So a lot of kind of micromanagement here, a lot of specific like planning, and it feels like, what I've heard of Ogre Battle is that it is so much more about that phase where you put your units together, you look at the map, you see what you're up against, and you say, okay, I want to build this group of characters for these enemies to take down because I know that if they have thieves, I've got archers on this group, or if they have this, like you're matching it up perfectly so that you're able to, make the most of those combat scenarios. And it's really engaging. Like, there is a sense of satisfaction to watching the animations play out, and a real tension to the kind of real-time element of it. I will say I'm not the best at managing lots of characters all at the same time, because there are moments where I'm like, I don't know where to send this unit, but I should just get them moving in a direction. And so I just like plonk it down randomly, and they're like moving towards generally an enemy area, but then another unit is also moving towards that enemy area. So yeah, I feel like I just need to get my head around that a bit more personally. But yeah, it feels already like there's a lot of meat on the bone, and I am barely scratching the surface. There is a kind of not a programming element to it, but there's going to be a lot of nuance, I think, added. Part of it is just like a system like this that has so many things going on, where characters have different abilities, and if they're the leader of a group, they'll have a separate ability, and if they have these certain pieces of armor, like there's so much, and there's so many classes, and each class seems to do something completely different. So it feels like there's a learning curve there, and it's doing a good job of getting you on at the beginning, but there's a real density. It's a systems-rich game, and that's really interesting, coming from a narrative-rich game to a systems-rich game. It's the question, sometimes studios can't make that jump, but I mean, Vanillaware are proving it time and time again that they have the chops for it, so it's super impressive so far. The other cool thing is that, outside of battle, you can just kind of wander around the overworld, talk to characters, buy things from shops, do side quests, find shiny bits on the ground. Of course, everyone knows my favorite thing in video games is clicking on shiny bits on the ground. It's just in every video game, it's just like a little dopamine hit, right? Just collect little bits from the ground. I think it has a great vibe to it. It's a game that I can see myself losing a lot of hours to. And here's the thing, I haven't actually bought it yet because the demo is extremely long, very generous. But also, it's sold out everywhere. Like, I was looking at UK retailers online, and I couldn't find a copy. Like, it was just gone, which I think is interesting because it shows that, Vanillaware, they're a niche enough developer, and a lot of people know about them and their games, but I think they're kind of like a beloved kind of niche set of creators who, because of the reception I think this game has got, and because I think there is a big audience, especially on Switch, for tactics games, I think they just underestimated the number of people who'd be interested. It may well be the fact that over the years, 13 Sentinels have obviously garnered a great reputation, and so they have made a lot more fans in those in-between years. And so now this new thing comes out, and they're kind of like, they're kind of surprised maybe by the reception, surprised that as many people want to play it as they do. Which is very cool. I think it's awesome. And I certainly am one of those people who, came on board with 13 Sentinels and now very much want to play Unicorn Overlord. The trouble is, all the games that I want to play this year, they're all giant RPGs that never end. I put 80 hours into Infinite Wealth. I'm currently about 45 hours into 7 Rebirth. Got Persona 3 on the back burner, which I really want to play this year. And by all accounts, Unicorn Overlord is like another 50 to 60 hour game. So, as much as everyone said, 2023, one of the greatest years in gaming, and I definitely see that argument. From a personal perspective, we're talking about personal taste here, it's definitely, 2024 is heating up for me. It's definitely, for my personal taste, I think, potentially going to be a year to rival last year, which is very, very cool. And we've got stuff like Dragon's Dogma 2 coming through as well, so it's one of those years where I think the first half is going to be particularly brutal, especially with long games. And hopefully things cool down a little bit and everyone can catch their breath and can finish some of these giant RPGs, because it's a lot to take on. Those are the two main things I've been playing. I've continued, of course, to play Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which you will hear my thoughts in a moment. I just wanted to, before you hear my thoughts, not caveat them, but be like, I'm just so bouncing all over the place with this game. I felt like I was quite harsh when I talk about it. I talked about it on the Patreon show, again, that you're about to hear, which is weird because I'm doing this after, but you're going to hear it after. But I feel like I still really enjoy it a huge amount, and it's interesting because I'm vacillating wildly where, I got back to the game after recording, and I did a side quest, and immediately I was like, this is one of the worst things a game has ever asked me to do. Like, it is actually, it might be the most baffling, infuriating side quest that has ever been put in a video game. If you want to know specifically, it involves chickens. It involves slowly getting chickens to follow you. And it involves the game being like, okay, for this last chicken, how about we put you 2 fucking miles into the open world and then get you to slowly get... Like, I couldn't fucking... When I realized what the game was asking me to do, I immediately ran away from that quest and decided to not do any more side quests in that area. It just absolutely sucked. And then what happened was I went into the next area and I found a mini game that I loved. And I just ended up doing a bunch of open world stuff when I I wasn't intending to. I just went around. I was like, oh, actually, yeah, I'm in the mood now, and I'm doing the open world stuff, and I'm having a great time. And I was like, this game's great. This game's amazing. So just to put context for that, I think my opinion for 7 Rebirth is just gonna widely vacillate. And it's going to depend on the thing that I did last, right? Like, what was the last thing I did? That's my opinion in the moment of 7 Rebirth. So yeah, it's a good conversation. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. But I just wanted to put that out there because I have played more since we recorded that. And yeah, I'm not going to be able to finish it before I go. I fly out tomorrow, so I've got a lot of RPG to come back to once that's done. And the final thing is, what do I play on the plane? Obviously, by the time this comes out, I think I'll have come back, but I don't know what I'm going to play on the plane. Here is my most infuriating thing, ladies and gentlemen. The Steam Deck, right? It's great, but it does not track your playtime in offline mode. Now, why is this a problem? Because here's the thing. I've been playing and loving Trails in the Sky, first chapter. Of course, the first game in the Kiseki series, the start of my Trails journey, already amazing game. I'm loving it. I'm like 18 hours in. It's fantastic. And I really want to play that. It's a big RPG. I can make a huge dent in it on the plane. I can play so many hours of Trails in the Sky. But when I play it on the plane, none of those hours that I play will be tracked. And you might say, NBZ, what the fuck are you talking? You're an idiot. Why would you say this? Just enjoy the game. Don't worry about how many hours you put into it. Just enjoy the game. But there is something for me about like knowing, especially with long games, long RPGs, of like, I can look back and say, I can go and tell you the total number of hours I've put into the Yakuza series because I have the time that I put into it on Game Pass and across all these platforms on PlayStation. How many hours did I play Lost Judgment? How many hours did I play Yakuza 3? It's all there. And so I can add it all up together and be like, wow, I played 450 hours of all those games put together. I like it as a stats kind of thing. It's just really nice. And so, you know, if I play Trails in the Sky on the Steam Deck, in 10 years' time, when I'm looking back and I'm like, man, how many hours did I put into the entire Trails series? I'd be like, well, it's not accurate, because that time I went to America and played Trails in the Sky for 6 hours straight. Well, what are you going to do? So, I mean, the only way to do it, right, is to come back home and just leave it running on my PC for 6 hours during a work day, which is just the stupidest shit in the world. But it just infuriates me to no end. And it does speak to the fact that, you know, Steam Deck's great, but it's just not built for handheld in the same way that Nintendo builds handhelds, right? Nintendo, they build it so you put it into sleep mode and it stays in sleep mode and like loses no battery. You can suspend games and the music doesn't keep playing over the top. Like when you go back to a home menu in Steam Deck, the game is still running, you know, it's not actually going, it's not actually putting it in a suspended state. I think that's the sort of thing that makes me think, or should I just take my Switch and play fucking Bayonetta, Cereza, and the Lost Demon instead? Maybe. I'm leaning more Steam Deck at the moment, but I don't fucking know. This offline playtime thing really gets my goat, I'll tell you what. So it's a decision I have to make, but we'll see. My quest really is to see how many people on the plane / at the airport are playing Balatro. That's the real question. How far has it spread really? So we'll report back on that. But anyway, hopefully that gives you a nice little cross section of what I've been checking out and playing. And after this break, is there going to be a break? I don't think it's going to be a break. It's just going to be, let's just go straight into it. I'll just pop the episode after this, and you'll hear the intro music for the Patreon show. And yes, of course, you can support us on Patreon if you so wish. And you can get access to shows just like this one you're about to hear about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Enjoy. Hello everyone, and welcome to your Patreon exclusive episode for the month of March, the single month of March. Might as well be 7 months long in 1 month, but here we are. We're available and ready to talk to you, fine lovely people on Patreon about video games, Nintendo video games, because it's This Nintendo Life. I am NBZ, and I'm joined by Bally, who he's somewhere else. He's gone to a different place.
I have officially moved house. It's a lot of work to move house.
Yeah, sounds like it.
It's quite tiring. And then I was thinking,
you've done a lot of moves though, right? But I guess this is probably a move of a larger, more gargantuan size.
Yes, and it turns out a lot of the stuff that we own is in fact Bally Junior's, and moving with a child is like moving on hard mode, kind of in some ways. But I was just thinking, like, how many different places have we recorded TNL?
That'd be a very interesting stat of like which spot that you have sat in for recording is the one where you have done the most episodes.
I think it's probably somewhere at the last place, because that's the only place I've lived for more than, since my like childhood home, that's the only place I've lived for like more than, I don't know, a year and a half, a year. So
right, yeah,
I think that one wins, but just a weird thing to think about. But I now have like a separate room just for podcasting, which is really nice. We've got a bit more space, like so much to do, but it's good. We're pretty happy, but there's still an awful lot more to do. And yeah, gaming has been a little bit of a casualty in this move, but I did get in a good chunk of the game we're about to talk about before the move.
Yeah, significant amount, I think. So it is March, and on the 29th of February, the leap day of leap year that this is, our extra day that we get, Square Enix decided, hey, let's put out a game so that then the anniversary only happens every 4 years, because that's a great idea. And
that's going to be a great marketing beat in 4 years' time.
It will, yeah. They'll be like, wow, it's 1 year old. Congrats, everybody who finally made it to be one, which is, yes, that is going to be interesting. I wonder if we'll probably be in marketing cycle for the third part by that point, right? I imagine in 4 years' time. Yeah. Probably on the PlayStation 6, of course, and mad that the development cycles have gotten like that, but I think that's likely going to be the case. But of course, we were talking about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, the second in the trilogy of remakes for Final Fantasy VII, a thing which I think is still baffling to some degree, but also kind of makes sense. It's been very interesting, I think, leading up to this, and everyone talking about it and all that sort of stuff. Bally, of course, to set context, you have never played the original Final Fantasy VII.
I have never. It was something I kind of wanted to do after playing Remake, and things are busy. Stuff always gets in the way, but now playing Rebirth, I do still want to try and have the goal of playing the original game before the third game, but we'll see.
Yeah, and I basically... There was a big hype for 7 Remake when it first got announced at that press conference in 2015 from Sony. And as soon as that announcement happened, I decided I'm going to play Final Fantasy 7. And so I think it was 2016 that I ended up playing 7.
You had a good time with that game?
I loved it. I think it's fantastic. I think it was like my number 2 Goatee Dakoti for that year or something like that. I think, it stands alongside Final Fantasy 6 as the 2 best Final Fantasy. Like, if we're talking about,
you can't pick between them, can you?
Yeah, it's really difficult. Like, I think 7 is a more streamlined experience. Like 6 requires a bunch of grinding at the end, especially with all the characters, and you have to have the 3 different parties.
It does, yeah.
I remember that one forest that we went to and like just endlessly grinding.
Trick forest.
Yeah, the trick forest to find those enemies that would give us a bunch of experience, to make sure that all of our characters were equal level to do the 3-pronged approach for that final, which is a cool final dungeon. I did think it was very cool, but it just required a lot of preparation and stuff, and the back half of 6 I think is less good. I think the story of 6 is probably superior to 7, I would say, maybe, and the music and stuff like that I still like 6 overall, but 7 just has a streamlinedness to it. It's goes down super easy, like it's super simple. It's the kind of RPG that Bally, when you think about RPGs and you're like, oh, there's so many systems and blah blah blah, although you're a big fan of stuff like Octopath, which is a bit more complex than I maybe thought you might be into.
Yeah, I've got my RPG chops have improved.
Yeah, for
especially
sure.
through games like Octopath. But I agree, I like a simple one as well.
We're talking about when you first started playing RPGs. I think 7's actually it's honestly a perfect first RPG for anybody, even today, I think, just with how simple it is and how easy it is to understand everything, right? Like with 6, you had espers, and espers were character dependent, whereas with 7, they basically made materia their own thing, and so materia level up independent of character, which means that you can do a lot of hot swapping, which to some degree meant that characters in the original 7 felt a little homogeneic. Like the only difference to a character was what's their limit break, because you could put any materia on any character and basically make it work for them. So yeah, I think that was maybe one drawback of it, but I think overall a really good game, like very of its time. Obviously the writing is very difficult to parse, sometimes localization's a bit wonky, but you get the broad strokes, you get the idea, the music's great, like the environment, the world, it's all really cool, and like it's very interesting when you think about the transition from 2D to 3D, because like things like Ocarina of Time reimagined or Metroid Prime reimagined, like it's the same vibe, same feeling, but they approach it in a slightly different way. And 7, I think, is interesting because like you get onto the world map and it's like, oh, this is just like a world map from like Final Fantasy 6, except it's in 3D now, and you're a little 3D guy walking around this like empty open space to the next town, and like you see the towns on the world, and it's like it's the same as any classic 2D RPG, right? Which I thought was very interesting when I first played it. And it, it has stuff like, oh, you're going to get a buggy to go faster, and then you're going to get the airship to go across the world, and all that traditional JRPG stuff. It was just, oh, now it's in 3D, basically, which I thought was kind of interesting. I guess that directly relates to this game, because really what this game is it's the part of the game where the game opens up, and in the original you left Midgar and suddenly you can walk around this overworld. Only now it's 2024, and so to have an overworld that you walk around, expectations from players are slightly different, right? You can't just have like this blank map that you walk across and your character's now smaller and now you just walk between regions. That said, Final Fantasy 16 surprisingly close to that format, because it basically shows you a world map and it's like, I'll just click the level you want to go to. You're not walking around as Clive or whatever, but it is actually kind of calling back to that classic RPG thing in a way, even more so than this. This one is like, no, we're kind of gonna do a Xenoblade, and we're gonna kind of give you like large open spaces, multiple of them, you can run around in and do stuff. And so I guess we'll get into it. But Bally, how are you feeling so far overall about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth?
I'm very hot on it, and we should say like we're gonna maybe talk kind of spoilery thoughts a bit later in the show.
We'll do a demarcation point, I guess, so people you can basically listen up to that timestamp, and then we'll go into more specifics, basically about story and locations and stuff like that.
Yeah. So I'm 22 hours in. I'm kind of early in chapter 5, and I am really loving this game. I'm not going to like say, do I like it more or less than Remake? I mean, what I'm loving the most, to be honest, like not a ton of story has happened, but what I'm loving the most are the locations, some of the character dialogues, and the mini games. Like that's just kind of like what I'm loving the most. And the pacing feels strong in the sense that I don't feel like I'm just doing the same thing over and over again yet. Like I'm 22 hours in, so like maybe that will happen later when you're doing more and more open world stuff. But yeah, the combat has kind of stepped up a bit. I think it's a little bit complicated, and I've got my head around it, but I don't think the game does a great job of saying this is the new stuff and this is how it works.
No, because there's the synergy moves, right? And so when synergy stuff gets introduced, I was like, and to explain this, is basically when two characters do something together. And so there are synergy moves in your menu and you can click them, but those are ones you have to build up. So you have to build up enough meter between characters, and then Cloud and Aerith will do a move together, or Barrett and Red 13 will do a move together. And I thought that's what synergy was. And then I realized, oh, wait, there's also these other moves that happen if I hold R1 on my controller and then press one of the face buttons. I can do a kind of little mini combo between two characters, but it doesn't have a cooldown that I can do as many times as I want, and apparently is quite good for building up meter on the characters you're not controlling, which took me much longer to use those or remember that I had access, because I think my brain was so locked into the previous kind of flow of Remake combat, which is very much do damage, get your meter up, use an ability, heal, use a spell. There's so much going on, and because the combat is active in that way, my brain never went to, and like I also early on anyway, I'm doing it more now. I wasn't blocking much. I was dodging more, and turns out that's not actually a good idea. You should be blocking more.
Typical you is just hit a block. You gotta get straight in there.
Right, and it turns out you should be parrying really, and that means like blocking with the right timing, which I think is quite hard in this game because there is a wishy-washy turn-basedness to it, and so it's not like Sekiro where you hit it and it's nailed the timing and that's the exact parry moment. You almost have to preempt enemy attacks with that stuff. It's a little wonky. Like
depends on the enemy, but it can be tricky.
There is a motorcycle fight that you'll have done, right?
Yes,
yeah. That was the first time that I properly used the parry because there really wasn't another way to get past that fight. So yeah.
And I think what's cool about the skills that you kind of do together, not the super powered up ones, the kind of basic non-charged ones, is they kind of cover for some of the characters' weaknesses. So, for example, Tifa and Cloud can link up where Cloud will propel Tifa into the air because she can't otherwise really fight in the air. Or likewise, one of the big issues with Aerith is that she's like a glass cannon and she constantly takes damage. Like one of her moves will have Cloud or another character like actually defend her. So like, I love that there's just that little bit of, oh, this is my weakness, and this character can cover that weakness for me in some way. Yeah, like that's kind of the definition of what I believe synergy should be, right? Like that's kind of like covering weaknesses, covering bases. So I like that aspect, but I've kind of gone off topic. We're going to get to your general thoughts at MBZ.
Yes. I was very hot on Remake. I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was a great translation of like the world of the original and a fresh take on combat, and I thought the character stuff was excellent, the dialogue, all of it just fun, enjoyable, just opened it up a bit more. And that Midgar section is great in the original, but it is like 7 hours long. It's not that long. And they just blew it out into the whole 40-hour thing. And I think I could understand criticisms of that game at the time, and I was like, oh yeah, I see those, but they didn't really bother me because I was so enamored with the freshness of everything else. So like, yeah, sure, you go through that tunnel a bunch of times and you have to move those slow cranes and stuff, but I was like, I just like being in this world with the music and all that sort of stuff, and I was like, I'm kind of happy with that. I think Rebirth is where none of that stuff is fresh anymore. I already know about it, and it's cool, but I've played a game with that stuff already, and so that basically doesn't excuse as much. So there's a level of Tears of the Kingdom to this game for me, which is I've already seen this, and there's not a lot else being added on top, and so the things that frustrate me about it tend to compound a bit more and make things feel worse than I think they probably are. But I think it's just a thing where because of that, like those flaws stick out more to me essentially. And so stuff like, all right, this fucking Mako vacuum, we're just gonna slowly,
I mean, that's so early game that
super early,
it's not too bad, but I know what you mean.
Because that repeats, right? Literally today before this call, I was doing a section, and guess what? I had to slowly move some shit so that a wire could be moved through a thing, so I could plug in a wire. Like, they don't leave it behind. Like, they start with it and they keep bringing it back. Like, okay, let's find this chocobo, and it's so fucking slow in this bad stealth minigame.
There's a lot of slow movement in this game.
Huge amount of it. And so, like, that combined with the fact that now they've gone open world, now they've blown it out, and so there's so much more to do, so much more time to quote unquote waste, that the momentum feels like it is being lost and the pace feels like it's being lost. And I'm enjoying the game. I'm still playing a good amount of it and I'm getting through it, but I am getting to that point where I'm like, I just kind of want to see this through now. And it's not what I wanted really, because I was enjoying doing the open world thing and like going around and doing those towers and fighting enemies, and I think the best part of this game really is still the characters and the dialogue. It's just so well written and it's charming, and I love all these people. Like, it's so well realized, and you do get those moments of side quests where there will be interactions between characters, and it's just some of the best dialogue in the game and like character building.
It's a shame those side quests aren't kind of counted in the same, as it were, dot matrix.
The world intel.
The world
kind of
map. Each world map counts, whereas there's like these hollow dots, and every time you do something, a dot fills in. Because I've missed a few side quests because I've prioritized the dots, but arguably for the most part, the side quests are more interesting than the dots because you get those character interactions. So like I'm now tempted to like, hey, I should go back and do those. I don't know. Have you done all those side quests as you progress?
Yeah.
You have.
I've done all the side quests because I went back to Junon to Calm, the first area, the grasslands area. I went back there after getting to Junon in order to basically clean stuff up and then also do the side quests. And that was worth doing, I think. I think it has. There's a bit of kind of light Persona elements in this, very very light, I would say, which is like all the characters in your party have a happiness meter associated with them, and so the more you interact with them, the more that you do the side quests with them and answer correctly to, like, there's these timed choices that happen, and choosing whatever choice will give you like 1, 2, or 3 points, like invisible points, right, towards a relationship meter. And so doing that stuff is beneficial if you want to, there will be things later in the game that are dictated by what is your relationship level between different people, and so choices will be made based on that. So I think there's a benefit to that depending on who you want to kind of build a relationship with. And I like that stuff, but yeah, some of it necessitates like waiting until you're in a further area. Like there's one of the big open world sections that I just did where there's like, it's split into 2 halves where you do the first half and then there's a side quest, but I couldn't complete that side quest until like 6-7 hours later when I got to the second half of that open area. So they leave stuff hanging sometimes for you to go back to, so they're almost like tempting you to come back to previous areas. And yeah, I got to a point where there was one big open area followed by another big open area, and I'm like, I feel exhausted. I just feel exhausted thinking about how long this game takes. And I think part of it is a pacing thing with intensity, right? I think intensity plays a huge role of like how much you feel like you've played of a game versus how much you actually have. A game like Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild, intensity level is quite low because it's all about world exploration and constantly finding new things. And so you can play that game for 10 hours and not realize it. Whereas I think with a game like this, there are story sequences that are an hour long, but they are so intense that it feels like you've been playing for even longer than that. And so I think I'm at a point where I have like 4 more chapters to go, and I feel the length of that stretching ahead of me, and I know how much more there is. And looking at that open world stuff, I'm kind of like, the pacing has been killed somewhat because there's a point at which the momentum and the story and what you want to do, and I can't remember who was talking. There was a podcast I listened to who was talking about that. I think it was Friends per Second, and Timur Hussein, who gave this game an 8 out of 10, and I think has probably similar feelings to me on it, and that there's a slight bit of disappointment with this game because of the fact that what they did in the original Final Fantasy VII was that game was a certain time and place where it was gameplay driven, gameplay first, and story was there, and story is very important. Obviously, story is like a crux of like the world and everything, but there's an extended sequence, which is the sequence we play in this game. That is, you go to a place, you do something that's kind of related to the main story, but then you go off and do something else, and it feels like a bit of a slice of life anime where you're going to these individual locations, you're doing something there. A lot of the time, it feels inconsequential because it is just kind of casual fun. And in the original game, I think that's fine because the game is about leveling up and going around the overworld and just seeing weird, wacky new places, right? It's one of the difficulties, I think, to adapt something like Final Fantasy VI as well, right? It's just, you go to these weird places that don't really make sense in a more grounded take on the world. And so, you go to this beach area, you go to, Cosmic Canyon, all these places, basically. And these places feel kind of ephemeral. They feel like nothing really important is happening, but they're fun in the moment of the original game. When you translate that over to this iteration of the series, where story has taken a front seat, the characters are way more important, it's really built around that, but you still try to retain the kind of the casual gameplay kind of variety, throw everything at the wall minigame approach of the original game. I think it just doesn't work quite as well in the context of a modern release in 2024. And I think it means that when you get to those moments, the pace feels like it crawls to a halt, and you don't feel like any progress is being made on the narrative end of it. And I think that is I've talked about it as like, JRPGs often have the kind of flabby middle, right? I think a lot of them go through this. Sea of Stars, for me, definitely had that.
What if you had a whole game that was the flabby middle?
And that's the thing. This is basically a whole game that is like the really fun fluff that was in the original, but now we've made it a huge part of this actual full experience. And we're adding even more on top. Like the boat ride that you're on right now, that's not in the original game. You see a boat going across an ocean and you arrive at Costa del Sol, right?
Right.
Like they've just blown it out to make it, to expand it, because frankly they need to justify the length for a game of this size and budget, to make it so that the third game then has enough stuff to do as well. Because if you don't, pad out an entire beach sequence, then you're going to get too far through the game that then the final part won't have enough to deal with, essentially.
Were you much hotter on it when you were at 22 hours, not 40?
No, I think I was pretty lukewarm by 10 hours. I think I remember talking to you about it, and I was like, yeah, this thing's not hitting really.
See, because
like,
I'm hotter than that. Like
yeah.
I must admit, I think this game would struggle without the mini games. And what I mean by that is that like Queen's Blood and Fort Condor are two of the most fun things I've done in this whole game, and mixing those up with the casual exploration and my enjoyment of seeing the locations, and then having those sequences that are more story driven and linear that are kind of at the end of each open world section, and I'm only kind of at the end of the second of those. That pacing is a really great mix for me, and if the rest of the game is like that, I'm kind of convinced I'll have a good time. Now, if there's mini games I bounce off, and I know you bounced off Fort Condor massively, but like,
oh yeah,
if there are mini games I bounce off later, I might have a rough time. But equally, my favorite mini game is Queen's Blood, and there has been a really great amount of that so far. Apart from, I would argue that the gap between the first time playing Queen's Blood and the second time is potentially about 9 to 15 hours, depending on how much stuff you do. So that's one gripe I had initially at the start of the game. But other than that, like, I do really enjoy this location, and now we've got this character dialogue, and now we're playing this different mini game, and now we start exploring this open world, and I kind of, even though not a ton of plot is happening, like, I'm just really enjoying being in the world, a bit like you were describing Final Fantasy VII Remake. Like, I'm kind of still there, and these kind of new locations you've mentioned that I'm going to reach in the next 20 hours, like, I'm still really excited to see those and understand what's going to be the unique twist of that area in terms of like mini games and other stuff to do. And I'm definitely feeling that. Honestly, like when you were talking about Yakuza, I've forgotten the name. I keep forgetting the
Infinite Wealth. Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth. Yeah.
Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth. I was kind of jealous of like how zany and serious at the same time that game is, but also how you were doing like these fun mini games and doing all these things. And like, I kind of want a piece of that, but equally I don't want to play all the Yakuza games. And it feels a little bit, correct me if I'm wrong, that like Rebirth has kind of got a little bit of that energy where you've got this serious story. Yeah. And like, I'm enjoying that mix up and play. And like I said, I think the mini games are kind of pulling me along, because if this was just the open world stuff and just the narrative stuff, it'd be good, but like this, I think there's genuinely something really special about like Queen's Blood, and I did really enjoy Fort Condor. I know that's kind of it's kind of like a Marmite game according to lots of other people online who really bounce off it. But I've really loved the mini games and everything. It's a powerful combo for me.
I'm gonna have to get you on Clash Royale on mobile, Belly, because that's exactly what that fucking game is. No, I totally get that, and I think to be clear, like I am still enjoying myself a lot. Like I think there's like the character stuff is so fun, and this cutscenes are just like you see the money on screen, right? It's just like there are so few games these days that have this much money spent on them, and like for all those mini games that will be custom things, like it's crazy. I do think the mini games they're fine. Like the ones that aren't Queen's Blood or Fort Condor, the more built out ones, they're okay, they're fine. Like I think
so the ones that you've seen that I've not seen yet, they're just fine.
They're fun little things. Like there's some cool stuff in there. They bring back some stuff from Remake as well, but I think when we talk about the Yakuza comparison, like for me that game just has a head and shoulders step up when it comes to the quality of those individual mini games. Like there are the same number, but they're all actually even higher quality than the ones in this game. And that's part of that team has been building those for years and years, and so they can build upon foundations that have already been set, whereas this team is now making them for the first time. So there's a little bit of an advantage that team has. But then also like the big mini games, like literally Pokemon and literally Animal Crossing, are so much larger and more in depth than Queen's Blood or Fort Condor as entire things, that you can literally, as I did, spend a whole weekend just playing the Animal Crossing thing in Infinite Wealth, and it's practically a whole game on its own. And so there is
play a standalone Queen's Blood game.
I don't know. I definitely like it a lot more than I did to begin with, because I think when you first asked me, I'd played those first 3 matches in the first area. Calm. And I don't think the game really shows its scales properly at that point in time. It's very easy, and it's like, I just do stuff. It definitely got a lot more interesting, and it has been something I do seek out, and I do play all the matches. And there is an element of like constantly switching the deck up, and you know, you get beaten by someone and you restart like 5 times. You're like, what am I missing here? What should I be doing? There's an area that does some cool stuff that you'll get to in, I don't know, like 10 hours time, that has some interesting kind of challenge stuff that goes on with that, where you have to kind of change your approach up. And it's cool because they slowly introduce elements, right? So like you begin and it's like, okay, you're just putting stuff down. Then you start to introduce like legendary cards. Then you start to introduce cards that can destroy other cards. Then you start to introduce cards that can be played on top of other cards. And like,
I'm not there yet, but that sounds cool.
Yeah, like there's a card that got introduced to me that if I played it on top of another card, it would destroy my own card but power up other stuff type of thing. So, and I wonder if there's even more to come from that. But it's interesting because really it's a game about area denial. It's much more, I found my success being less about, okay, got to get my Titan in first row immediately because then that's loads of points. It's much more about baiting your enemy to put something down and then denying them the area and blocking it out so they literally can't play. Stopping your enemy from being able to play any cards is how you win Queen's Blood, really. It's not a game about... It's a game about positional movement forward and how do you block that stuff. And I think the later parts of it will probably get more difficult because they introduce these other elements that can let your AI opponents kind of get past those things. But at least for the, you know, how much 40 hours I put into this game so far, I have found consistently winning by just doing a tactic of, like, there are certain early cards you get that I still use, like the crab. The crab is really strong. The crab, which does... It has a left and a right and an up, and the one above is a power-up icon. So it powers up a card above it.
Card.
Man, you got to get
different between games a bit? The card...
No.
Not different, but like the boosters you get and stuff.
No, I think all the boosters have the exact same cards in them, so you might have just not bought that booster. But that was an early one I got, and I have 2 crabs in my deck, and the crab is clutch. Like, I use that all the time. Cactuar is pretty good. It can boost some stuff. Like, there are a few go-to cards that I'm like, these are strong cards that I will always use in my deck, and then I'll rotate out other ones based on the opponent I'm playing and what tactics they're doing. It definitely has bloomed and evolved, and I do like it quite a lot. It's definitely... of the side stuff, it's definitely the best thing, I would say, overall. But yeah, it's something that initially didn't leave a great impression to me, because I don't think it takes a little bit of time to ramp up, I would say, to get really into
What was your big issue with Fort Condor?
Oh, I just fucking suck at it. I am a bad video game player when it comes to that stuff, because I think for me it's like a timing based thing of like, I have to wait until I can then deploy my guy, and I'm like, oh, who do I deploy? Oh, that guy. Oh, he just died in 2 seconds. Oh no, and I have to wait. Like, I just got overwhelmed, and like, I tried the second instance of it, like literally the one after the tutorial, the first one you do, and I played it like 4 times back to back, and within 5 seconds I died every time.
Would you play units that would trump the opposition unit in the triangle?
Yeah. I tried to do that, but like every time I was just like, oh no, but they have like 4 of these guys, and like they just throw so much shit at you that I'm like, I just don't know who to place where and how to do. I just fundamentally, from a gameplay perspective, I just despise everything about that game, and I have no fun with it. None. Like, I have negative fun with that game. And it sucked because that was a point where I was doing all the open world stuff and I wanted to clear it,
and
but that is part of it. It's tied to the world intel, and so I was like, well, was, I think, the first straw of me being like, well, I guess I am never gonna do all this stuff, because I never want to touch that game again in my life. Like, it repulses me. Like, I really do not like it at all, and I don't think there is any way for me to come back to that table and enjoy it. I just don't see it from a gameplay perspective.
So if you have like your completionist hat on, you know how you can defeat those tough enemies,
Yes.
and you'll have like three tick
boxes.
Yeah, and it'll have like a little yellow line of, almost as like a burger menu, like a little yellow thing on your map, and it won't be green until all those are completed. So when you complete Fort Condor, like there's 4 rounds, and then after the 4 rounds, it's like, do you want to do hard mode? And if you, like, so I've not tried the hard mode, but it remains like a yellow bar, a bit like those battles, until you've done the hard mode.
That must be infuriating for people who want to do everything, but like,
yeah, which is, but I was already content with not completing those extra, like, you've got to
the stagger and the pressure,
exactly,
and all that
stagger,
stuff,
pressure, whatever.
Yeah.
So me not doing the hard mode on Fort Condor, I didn't try it, but I might go back, because I did really enjoy that game. But there's a completionist element that you can maybe drive yourself a bit crazy with this game.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that's part of the excess of it. That's part of the, well, it has to be 80 hours long now because people are paying $70 for this now, and it's on PlayStation 5, and all, like, it's just a big budget, big game with so much stuff happening and things going crazy. And yeah, I totally understand. Like, I totally get it, but I think we're not the person who buys one game a year, right, and plays just that game. And I think this game is built for that person, really. It's built for those types of people. That's what AAA games are built for a lot of the time, right? They're built for such a wide, big audience. And I think that's kind of where this design comes down to. But I think part of it as well is just trying to get across that sense of the original. And to be fair, like, as someone who's played the original game, they are nailing it in terms of, like, putting things in here that you would think they would cut out, right? Like, stuff that you would think, oh, that seemed a bit goofy and weird in the original. Like, no, we're just going to do that. We're going to put that in, and that's going to be how it is, and you're going to do the exact same thing, but we're just going to blow it out in a way that makes it more expansive. And I do admire that, I think, because it shows that these people have a love and an understanding and a reverence for the source material they're drawing on, while they're still toying with it and playing with it and obviously subverting it. And, you know, I'm very interested to get to the end of this game and see what the hell is everyone's talking about, because it seems like the ending is quite divisive and probably doesn't explain things a lot, but also because it's a halfway, so 2/3 of the way through a story, it has to kind of like leave threads and let people theorize for the next 5 years, however long it takes to make another one. So yeah, there's a lot going on with this game. I'm interested how you feel about, like, the characters, and, you know, is there anyone you're gravitating towards more, and either from a combat perspective or from a character, like, narrative perspective?
Yeah, in terms of, like, combat, I mean, I'm a vanilla man, so Cloud's my main kind of guy most of all of the time, to be honest. And then it doesn't feel like any of them are proper healers other than Aerith, so she feels kind of important because not only is she a healer, but she's a very powerful magic user, and if you want a powerful magic user, I don't really know who else you're meant to pick. And then that leaves that third slot between the other 3 characters a little bit. Well, I've only got 3 so far. I think there might be more, but so I tend to go with Red 13. Red 13? 13.
Yep, that's correct. Yep.
Got the number right. Because he's bulky, but feels as powerful, if not more powerful, than Tifa in terms of, like, speed. And I love the counter thing that he does, and is it Revengeance, where
Vengeance mode, right?
Yeah, where you just charge it up and then he goes ballistic. Like, I love all that stuff. He's got, like, another move that kind of charges Revengeance mode fast. Is this called Vengeance or Revengeance?
It's Vengeance mode.
Vengeance.
Yes. No, not Metal Gear Solid Revengeance,
yes.
but just Vengeance.
That made up word. But yeah, so, like, charges up Vengeance mode much faster, and there's kind of working out counters with him. I enjoy all that. And yeah, because I feel like one of my builds in the first game was Cloud, Barret, Tifa, and doing like I swear Barrett's ATB builds up faster than anyone by, like, a considerable distance. So he's quite a good, like, tank, but I've not really played him at all. And there is a part of the game where that you are split up into parties and you're forced to use different characters, and that was actually
Yeah.
one of the toughest parts of the game for me quite early on. But I stick to that party almost all the time: Cloud, Aerith, and Red 13. What about you?
I've been trying to bounce between characters and try them out. I think I generally default to Tifa because she's just broken as hell. Like, if you use Unbridled, it's just basically you build up bars, then you do Unbridled Strength twice, and then you hit Rise and Fall, then you hit Omni Strike, then you hit up punch, whatever it is, uppercut. Those 3 back to back just like shreds every enemy for the most part. Like, you don't even need to build stagger, she just halves the health of an enemy with that 3 move combo.
You're building up the 3 and then you're doing triangle.
Exactly, yes,
right.
Exactly. So build up Unbridled Strength, which is just broken as hell. But she is very squishy, and I feel like I'm feeling the squishiness a lot more in this game than I did in Remake.
I am as well, actually.
Like Aerith and Tifa, like my go-to party is Cloud, Aerith, Tifa.
It's a very squishy
it's
party.
a very squishy party, and so
squishy.
There was an early side quest. You must have done this one where there's like an ice wolf down on a beach area. Maybe you didn't actually, because it's in the.
I did. No.
There's this ice wolf that you're chasing after. It's down on this beach area by the sea, and I fought that thing like 10 times because I just kept dying with Cloud, Aerith, and Tifa, but I was very adamant, and I was like, no, stubborn, I'm gonna just do this as them. And I eventually figured out a way to do it, but like, yeah, I died a lot, and I was like, wow, this is just a regular enemy in a side quest, and it's kicking my ass. I'm like, this game is it's definitely not holding back in terms of the difficulty, and there's a lot of challenges when it comes to the Chadley stuff of like, okay, you want a new summon, well then fucking fight Titan right now, and then he just smashes you. You're like, okay, guess I have to go to these 3 locations and do a weird rhythm mini game to depower him, and then I can fight him, and then I fought one of the third summon today. Was it yesterday? And that summon, it had a move where it gives you a time after you finish it. So either you die and it gives you a time, or you finish it, it gives you a time. I spent 5 full minutes fighting that thing, and then it did a move and just killed all my party members at once. I was like, that's fucking unfair.
There's a couple of enemies that have done that to me. Yeah. One of the final enemy, I think that like a final enemy appears when you do the kind of hard enemies in open world.
Yep.
So there was like a Cthulhu like creature in Junon, and it had a move that's just like, oh, you're all dead.
Right. Yeah. Which sucks. I really don't like instant death stuff like that, but yeah, some of the stuff I'm just like, how do I avoid it? Like, if something does a giant laser beam, it's like, do I block that? Is that the best way? Because like, I can't parry a laser beam. Like, I guess I just stand there and block it, or I like roll to the side. I'm not sure. With some
I feel
of that,
like Red 13, that's where he shines. Where if you've got 180B, you use that like counter thing, and he basically waits to be hit.
Yeah. And
when he's hit, you then counter, and your vengeance will just charge up massively. And I think it does less damage to him as well.
Yeah, and I've tried to use that, but I feel like every time I do that, I'm just standing there, and then nothing hits me. And then I'm just like, oh, and it's done now. And like, I never get to use it. Maybe I'm just fighting the wrong enemies, but every time I try and use it with him,
I find it works a lot better on tough bosses, and it works badly on like mini enemies.
Regular enemies, yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, he's fun. He's got some cool like Stardust Ray, which is I think one of the best moves from the original game.
One of the best like stagger moves I find is that move.
It's good for just killing lots of enemies at once. Also with this area of effect, it's huge. But yeah, I think that's his limit break in Original 7, which is why I kept him on my team in the original game, because it just does a lot of damage. So that is definitely a go-to with him. There's segments later on that you play a lot of Barrett, and I hadn't played a lot of Barrett, and then I was playing him, and I was like, yeah, he's actually really fun to use and just different. Like, that's the amazing thing about this game, I think, and like the remake as well, is every character feels so different, and they feel so different to play, and they all have their own unique mechanics tied to them. Like, it's almost fighting game level of like, yeah, these are just, everyone is so unique, and every approach you can take is so varied that like being Tifa feels totally different to being Barrett or to being Red 13. Like, there is obviously the core idea of everybody's the same, to build up a meter and use it, but everyone's triangle does something slightly different. So Yuffie, who obviously you could play as an intermission, so obviously you eventually get to play as Yuffie, and her thing is she throws a boomerang at an enemy, and you can either use the boomerang for physical attack, so you can just like slice at enemies, or you hold triangle to throw the boomerang, and then you basically use your square button to do magic. So she is magic and physical in one unit, which is super cool, and she has like really fast ways to build up her meter, and just a very enjoyable character to deal with ranged enemies, but also to, like, once you've built up that meter, do some really crazy kind of ninja moves up close. So yeah, everyone feels super distinct, and I think that is the strength of this game. Not only are the characters themselves and the dialogue and all the moments between them so good, and there's lots of funny moments as well. Like, there are moments like Cloud has this kind of dry delivery on some of his lines, and there have been a couple of those where I just fucking lost it. It's so funny, like the way that he delivers something in the context of the moment. I'm just like, wow, it's just really good comedic timing, which is so hard to get right in games. And I think this game does a really good job of it from a character level. But then, yeah, also just playing as Cloud is fun and different. But also, I don't really understand. I still don't understand operator mode, or why I should use it, or what it does. Which maybe that's a fault of the tutorial, or maybe I just didn't pay enough attention. Do you know like, what operator mode does? Like, why should I be using it?
It's essentially like, so you've got the standard mode, which is operator, right? Which is the
Punisher mode is the different one, right?
So yeah, operator is like, I'm more defensive, but I can run around the area faster and essentially build up a stagger. Mm-hmm. And then once an enemy is staggered, that's when you switch to like Punisher mode and do hella damage. And you're a lot less mobile in Punisher mode, so it's better. Okay. You're a bit more of a glass cannon and kind of, well, you're not a glass cannon necessarily because you can like counter mid Punisher mode. But yeah, I think it's a bit like Red 13's Vengeance in a way. Like, that's kind of the move you use once an enemy's staggered to just eviscerate their health is kind of how I use it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I forgot as well. I only just started realizing this because, like, you know, each weapon is like, oh, well, that one does more damage, the rune blade for magic. And so like, I don't want to use that. I want physical stuff for Cloud. But then I realized every weapon that you use has a special tied to it, a special move tied to it.
A different triangle move.
Different triangle.
Right.
Not different triangle move. It's a different ability. That gets added to your ability kind of list.
Yes.
And so you unlock those by maxing out a weapon, by using it a lot, basically. And so now I'm doing the thing where I'm like, oh, I should go back to Cloud's first sword and just fight a bunch of regular random enemies just to build up. Because you learn it by using it. So the more you use that specific ability to the weapon, the faster you'll level it up. And then eventually it gets tied to the character. And then any weapon you use, you can then still use that. So I need to do a better job about that to build up more stuff. Interesting, this game also added like a way to do elemental damage outside of materia.
Quite a few different ways, actually.
Yeah, each character outside of their skill tree, you know, the skill tree can be used to unlock like an ice move. I find those far less effective generally when it comes to doing weakness damage to enemies or pressure or building stagger.
I feel like they were put in just to stop everyone only using Aerith. I don't know, but she seems like the magic go-to. So if everyone can use some magic, maybe you're more inclined to mix up your party.
Yeah, to some degree.
I personally am using... Cloud's got some move with this sword where it's fire and lightning in one move. That's
the Firebolt blade.
Fire. It's really so good. Like, because it just takes an enemy weak to one of those, and you're staggering it very fast. Like, it's great.
Yeah, I put I like the dual materials they give you in this game: the lightning and wind, and the fire and ice.
Both on Aerith, of course.
Yeah, same here. Both on Aerith, so she has access to every magic essentially. But yeah, I feel like Aerith's special on her triangle I also don't understand because I've not used it properly. It's like she can move based on where her ward, and like you have to set up a ward.
So because she's such a glass cannon, the idea is that you essentially, say you're playing as another character like Cloud and you need to do some hella Aerith damage. You swap to Aerith and then she's getting, because the character you're playing as always receives the most attention from enemies. So because you've just switched to Aerith, the enemies are now moving to you. But triangle, and you just warp to the ward. And warping to that ward gives you space to get out some magic attacks, basically.
Right, but you have to place down a ward to begin with, right?
Yes, it's like I'd recommend doing that like really early any match and just having that ward ready to go, so that when you're fighting with say Cloud or Red 13 and you then swap to Aerith, boom, you can go to that ward, which will give you like an extra second to just either work up an ATB meter, get a healing thing out, or like some magic attack. Yeah,
I think for me, I find Aerith builds meter so slowly. I really need to add like the ATB increase materia to her or something, but because she builds meter so slowly, I tend to not drop down the ward.
Yeah, I use a lot of, I play as Cloud and then use the joint skill with Aerith where he kind of like does range attack using Aerith's magic and it builds both their ATB. I really like that one.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to help build it, right, is using those synergy moves to kind of help build it up. But yeah, I do think I have been enjoying playing as everybody. I think everybody is, they have their own place, and I think all these fights are really taking me down to the wire, right, which is kind of what you want. Like there's definitely moments of like, okay, everyone's down, more Phoenix downs, like can I still survive this like last thing, and like barely scraping through, which I think this game feels at its best when everything's executing perfectly and you've staggered and you have a limit break ready to go and you have a summon ready to go, you have like all that stuff in your back pocket. That's where you feel at your best. But
once you kind of turn the tide, a lot of these bosses go down really fast if you know what you're doing. Like you feel like, I said this to think about Octopath, but like you kind of feel like you get completely stomped by the boss, but then when you make it work, you stomp the boss, and it's not really that wiggle room in between as much. But yeah, because I found like a few of the bosses pretty tough, and again, predominantly just feels like my characters are quite squishy and using Phoenix Downs, using potions, but then kind of clicking and be like, oh no, actually, if I just use this move on this with this character, and then that'll stagger them, and then I get the, like for example, I was struggling on one enemy, and it's because I hadn't moved I hadn't moved the summon materia to like Barrett and Red 13, so like Barrett didn't have one. Then
didn't have all the stat boosts that come associated with it.
They have so many stat boosts, plus you get the summon, and I was like, oh well, now I've got the summon, and I didn't walk the match, but it became a lot easier, that kind of thing.
I realized, again, I was doing a boss fight right before we were recording, and I realized midway through that boss fight that two of my characters didn't have summons, so I was like, oh, this is why I'm finding this very difficult. It's because I just don't have the additional boost from that, unfortunately. So it can be a little tricky, and I think it's also tricky because the summon requires your ATB bar to be used as well. And so I do like the synergy moves that give you like 3 ATB bars where it splits it for a few of the characters. I think that can be quite helpful, especially the ones that also mean there's no mana being used, so you can do the most powerful healing to everybody. Like there's some good usage of the synergy stuff, but it's always that line of like, oh, I'm so close to staggering it. Do I just wait for the stagger and then pull off all these moves, or do I use it in order to get to the stagger point because my characters are dying and I'm going to die if I don't do this now, it's always that tricky balance, and I think this game...
Well, you've just staggered an enemy, do you use this window to heal everyone,
Yes, yeah, exactly. Like, it's like, oh god, but they're staggered, so now I can really do double unbridled strength into the triple triangle, and that's where I do all my damage. But yeah, I have to just make that decision. I think, I have not died on a story boss. Actually, I have, but I have not died at like the very end of a boss, of like I've been fighting it for 6 minutes and then I die, which I think could be frustrating, especially with all the phases bosses go through, how much health they have, how spongy they can be potentially. But I think the game, like this boss that I just did, I died after about a minute and I was like, oh, I was just fucking up. I wasn't being optimal and I was messing things up. Then the second try, I did it first time, right? And that I never felt in massive danger. And I think that's the benefit of this system, is that, as long as you're the right level, as long as you're kind of like on par with what the game expects you to be, you'll get through it. You'll be able to. And it requires a lot of attention, a lot of management, a lot of focus for this game. But ultimately, it just feels very rewarding when you get through all those situations, those combat situations. So, yeah. It's good stuff, and I think it's really the backbone of the game. I think it is the strongest element from a mechanical standpoint about the game, because everything else feels, it's good, but like not up to the par of what the combat like is. The combat
yeah.
is the star of the show, really.
I don't think the new additions to the combat revolutionize it, and
No.
like your take where Rebirth is a bit like, you know, Tears of the Kingdom to Breath of the Wild, like do you not feel that the same with the combat, more so just the kind of game overall?
Yeah, more the game overall, I think, because the fundamentals of the combat they nailed first time anyway, and I think
They did, yeah.
the combat is still very fun to engage with. It's still very fun to do, and I haven't got bored of it. It's the one element where I can see myself playing this for 80 hours and still enjoying the combat, especially because they throw new characters into the mix often enough that you are forced to learn new stuff and change things up and, you know, change your materia and like figure out new options and all that sort of stuff. Whereas, you know, doing a tower or doing a live stream, it's the same QTE button press every time. You know, it's not a lot of building on that, and it's more busy work of running around a world to tick a box more than do something interesting. And so I think that's where more of the burnout comes into play, because the game that already has a languid pace, a leisurely pace, and, you know, to be fair, I enjoy a lot of those individual moments, like hanging out on the beach is a great time. Like, it's really good fun. And then going to the Gold Saucer and all the wacky stuff that happens there. It's great cutscenes, great environments, like gorgeous things to look at. But then you get to a point where, like, okay, I want to move on with the story. And there's a section after Gold Saucer that I was like, this is tedious as fuck. And it feels like, now this is the problem I have with games like this. When games like this take stuff that should be side stuff and then they force you to do it as part of the main story, that's where I get frustrated. Because there is a section where I'm like, okay, this feels like a side quest, but you're forcing me to do it as part of the main quest. I think that's where games like this fall down, personally.
Queen's Blood tournament?
No, not like that. More like tedious side quest stuff that doesn't have a lot of story association with it. So there's not story intrigue. It's more busy work of running around, doing individual kind of tasks for characters that are not immediately rewarding on a narrative level. And so it just feels like busy work. And it feels like, if I wanted to do this, make it a side quest so that I could optionally choose to do it, versus forcing me to do it and making the pace even slower than it already was. That is the stuff I think that irks me. And here's the thing, I've heard that I haven't even got to the worst of it yet. Like, that's the thing that scares me, and why I am thinking about just not doing any more open world stuff is, apparently, like, in 2 chapters time, I'm going to get to the really bad stuff where it's like, man, we're almost wrapping up the story. No, we're not. We're going to go do some more tedious stuff. That worries me greatly. And I'll see how I feel when I get to it, but enough people have said that I'm like, I'm already kind of feeling that with some of this stuff. It doesn't sound good for the back half of this game.
You said you were like feeling that even from like June on, right?
Yeah, I think
it just kind of gets worse.
Yeah, I think, okay, so the other elephant in the room here that we haven't addressed yet is, I wish this game was on a personal computer, or say a device that was powerful enough to run it properly, because apparently the current generations of consoles, they're just not good enough. And I either have to choose between...
I think Horizon Forbidden West would have some issue with that, but I know what you're saying.
Yeah, I do. You're
I think
right.
it's just been optimized poorly.
I think it's definitely a Square Enix problem more so than anything else. But also it's a Square Enix problem for choosing to be exclusive to PlayStation, because that's the decision they made, and so there is no other option right now. And 16, if you remember, 16 had really bad performance problems that I also was very annoyed about because I was like, this is bullshit. I have to play this on one piece of hardware and I can't use anything else, and it sucks. And yeah, that game had really bad frame rate issues. This game, either it's a smudgy Vaseline filled mess that runs at 60 frames a second, or it's a less good feeling 30 FPS, especially for a game with combat like this, that looks decent, that looks like a PS4 game. And it feels like this, more so than anything, makes me feel like, man, we really didn't jump generations at all. Like,
you need to try it on your 4K though, because I think it looks great, and I know I've not got as good an eye as you for spotting these things, but I don't think it looks as good as a game like Horizon Forbidden West, for example. But I do think it looks really great.
And you're playing on performance mode, right?
I'm playing on performance, yeah.
that simply doesn't compute in my brain. Like, I look at performance mode and I'm like this looks like Xenoblade 2 on Switch. Like, that game was a fuzzy mess, and it's because they're trying to put this giant fucking open world thing on the first year of Switch when they don't understand the hardware. It's so fuzzy. It looks like it's 480p. I kid you not. On this monitor playing 7 Rebirth in performance mode, it is a smudgy fucking mess. I cannot understand like how it got to this point. And like, everyone is talking about it. Everyone is saying this is terrible. Like, this looks awful. Like, I've seen so many people mention it and be annoyed by it. And they say Square Enix are aware of it. Like, I think they're going to try and patch it. But like, man, how do you ship like this? I think it is a little baffling, frankly. Like, in this day and age, to ship a game of this budget and this scale and this size, and it is so blurry. It's unbelievable. I would like to look at it on a 4K TV and maybe that helps somewhat, because you are further away, right? Distance matters with this stuff. But I do still think that, I was still able to tell when resolution shifted on Horizon, because it happens when you have lots of characters on screen. You see the resolution take a nosedive and it goes down to like 480p style resolution. It's not actually that, but it looks so muddy that it feels like you're doing that. And yeah, I feel like I probably would still notice it. Probably be less annoying. But yeah, it sucks that I have to play a 30 frames per second game on a piece of hardware that certainly should let me not do that. And we've had this back and forth constantly of like, oh well, are we going to keep seeing 60 frames per second? And we are, but it's so compromised that you might as well have not done it. You might as well have not even bothered, because it's just an awful experience. So yeah, the nice thing about 30 FPS is like, hey, after you play it for like 5 minutes, your eyes adjust and you just don't remember anymore and you're fine. So like, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. Like, I've enjoyed my time and the game does look very nice. But yeah, it's a frustration. I think that for my first 10 hours with this game, I think it was partly it's doing the generic open world stuff and not feeling like the momentum of the story had gotten behind itself in the first 10 hours, combined with the performance issues and how bad it looked. And I was constantly switching back and forth between performance and quality, and that's a terrible idea, because as soon as you see 60 frames per second, you go back to 30 seems like a slideshow. So that's why you always, when I boot up, I'm like, I'm never touching performance mode again, because if I taste the sweet nectar of how smooth it is, I will look back at quality and I'll be like, oh, it's so slideshowy. If you just look at slideshow mode, it feels normal and it's fine. But if you taste the poison, then yeah, you're done for. So,
but like, no one was stopping you buying this game at the end of 2025 on PC.
No, I know, but like the discourse, Pally. I can't sit here and like not listen to people talk about the story stuff. And I'm someone who's very invested in the story of this series. Like, yeah. There is a meta level narrative layer to Final Fantasy VII Remake that is continuing in Rebirth. And it maybe it's a good time to transition into spoilers, I guess, if we want to do that. Unless you have anything else to say about just general stuff, Bally.
I think just that I am having a really good time, and I do find the balance between minigames, open world, combat, main story. I'm loving that balance so far in a way that I didn't have with the first game with Remake, because I felt like Remake was more... It's very much story beat to story beat, and the areas that were more chill and the exploration based were kind of the weakest aspects of that game. Whereas I feel like Rebirth has so much like mini games and other fun things to do that I just feel I'm enjoying that rinse and repeat kind of motion a lot more with this game for some reason. We'll see if that holds out, because I am skeptical that I'm 80 hours in. Yeah, I'm going to be a completely shell of the person I was that I started the game.
Especially because it's going to take you probably like a couple of months to get through it, right?
Yeah.
And pacing at that pace, like that's... I mean, I'm just interested to see how you feel.
We'll see.
Okay, cool. So we're going to do a spoiler warning here. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to cut off. But we're going to talk about up to chapter 5, I would say, where you are, Bally, in terms of story stuff.
The end of chapter 4, start of chapter 5,
Yeah, exactly. So leave now, forever hold your peace. And we'll start getting into it. So This game is, from a narrative perspective, interesting.
Slow.
We kind of talked about this. Yeah, it's slow. I think we talked about this like off mic, where like Final Fantasy VII Remake isn't a remake. It's kind of secretly a sequel because of like weird shit. Like there's meta level shit happening where like the Whispers are basically. Think of it on a meta level. The Whispers are basically fans of the original Final Fantasy VII. They're basically like, oh, no, it has to go exactly like this.
Yeah.
If you're going to do a remake, you have to do it exactly like this, and you're not allowed to do any other way. And we're going to, nope, oh, you're going to kill Barrett in remake? Nope, that's not allowed. We're going to bring him back to life. That's basically what the Whispers are.
The Whispers were destroyed at the end of the remake.
Seemingly.
Seemingly.
That's what you think. And so the idea was, oh, we've now broken free of fate. And so now we don't have to follow the course of history as it was in original Final Fantasy VII. Now anything could happen, right? Like the story could go in different directions and different stuff could happen. Turns out broad strokes are always going to be the same because like fundamentally this game is still built on the bones of the original Final Fantasy VII, and you go to the same places in the same order. But it's just, it's more built out, right? And so I did love this section of the first of the original game just because it's fun to walk around the open world or the overworld, I should say, and go to new towns and see new locations. And I think that's definitely the best part of this game so far.
I agree.
From that perspective, is seeing new, especially for me as someone who knows what it looked like in the original. Going up to Junon and looking at the huge cannon and the air hangar and like all the planes on that kind of like, I know from my perspective a few years ago playing it on Final Fantasy VII and being like, man, they really sell scale in this old PS1 game. Like this really feels like a really big like area. And then you get up there, you're like, wow, they pulled it off. They took what you saw in that kind of like, what do you call it? Like those backgrounds, those pre-rendered backgrounds in the original game that sold like a vision of scale. But now here is the actual scale. It's really this big and you can really run around it and see everything. And,
there's like bars with bald people and there's there's multiple bars and there's streets to explore. And like, that was one of my highlights of the game so far is Upper Junon, where I always knew Shinra is like this kind of fascistic corporation, but you really feel like it's almost like this blend of Nazi kind of red banners combined with Americana, and the thing it kind of looked like to me like this hangar, and it's almost like a town. Well, it is a town, I guess, on the top of Upper Junon. It reminded me of The Man in the High Castle. It's like, this is what America looks like in that point in time if the Nazis win, right?
It is literalizing corporation becoming government, which like essentially we live in that world now, but it's just, like the corporations do control what politicians do, right? And like sway like policy and like have influence. But in this game, they're like, no, full mask off. The corporation is the government, essentially.
Yeah, and we'll do it with the big red flags that otherwise would have had swastikas. And, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I just thought this area looked incredible,
right, because it's like it's a presidential parade for a CEO, right? Like that's what it is. So
and the minigame's cool and incredibly well rendered, and that all just adds to it.
It's very much reminiscent of the Honeybee Inn section of the first game, where it's like a rhythm game with a thing going on for it. And like that was there's one of my most memorable moments of the original game is you do the soldier marching stuff in original Final Fantasy
It's like
VII.
a mini game in the first.
It's a mini game, yeah. The mini game is very bad in the original. Like, you know what? It's something that I do think is a little bit to this game's credit. I don't think it's intentional, but the mini games in Final Fantasy VII were all very, very bad from a controls perspective. Like, none of them made any sense.
Were there loads of them?
It was a lot, yes. It was a lot. And like, there's a snowboarding one later on that probably will pop up in part 3 and stuff like that, right? Like, there's lots of weird, funky mini games. There's chocobo racing. There's all that sort of stuff. I think that there is a funny aspect to this of like I don't think the mini games are bad in this, but like the mini games not being great is kind of the DNA of Final Fantasy VII. So like I almost forgive some of the mini games for being not amazing because the original mini games were pretty terrible, right? Like, and if you want to replicate the feel and the idea of playing Final Fantasy VII, bad mini games is kind of the identity of that game in a way. So I almost get it, but I do think the marching mini game they do here is far better than the one that they did in original FF7, because I don't think I ever properly understood how to do the original one. Like, I messed it up constantly and like got the worst mark possible, and like the story just moves on, it's fine, but I didn't get the bonus, I didn't get the materia reward I would have gotten if I'd done it properly. But like it's just a terrible mini game, but it's memorable because the sequence is memorable. It's memorable. You go up there, you dress up as soldiers, and you start doing this performance. It sticks in the memory, even though the minigame was really bad. So it's cool that they realized it and they made it a lot better, which is cool.
What I love is just like, that's an area that just screams budget. It's like they've really gone for making Upper Junon just look fantastic, and everything about it, like the gradual reveals, the parade, the mini game, the banners, the whole look of it. Like, even the moment you come out the cave at like the end of chapter 3 and you can see Lower and Upper Junon, like the whole of Junon kind of from like, I was like, oh my god, like this world. I was so fascinated because having not played the original, I'm like, what's in this world beyond these grasslands? And I knew that at the end of the cave there'd be some kind of like reveal in Junon. Like, it's cool. Part of me was like, shall I just mainline and do all this stuff? Because you're kind of like, wow, Junon looks really cool. Now we're gonna go do open world stuff around the kind of east side of Junon before we do the kind of main part of Junon. So it felt like a real treat to beat all the open world stuff in main Junon, and then seeing like Upper Junon and doing all this stuff, because there's very little combat. It's very much cutscene focused, but it kind of works for the pacing of the game, and like I just love that moment.
Yeah, I think, and this like is interesting to me because I think the pacing is actually quite good to begin with. And like, they give you story, they give you open world, they give you story, they give you open world, and then like this sequence that you're in, you're gonna get a lot of story for a while, and it will make you feel like when you get to the next open world, you're not going to be burned out. But then they don't. Then they're like, open world, how about some more open world with your open world? Do you want some more open world? Here's some open world. And I think that is where it breaks down, because I think had they paced it better in the back half, then I wouldn't necessarily be feeling this. Because once I did, Junon, followed by the boat, followed by Costa del Sol, I was like, yeah, I'm ready to go out and do a bit more exploring, at that point, because I've had 6 hours of focus of just running through an area that is designed and specific. So I think it's just like, pacing thing. Bali, what do you think about the opening of this game? The very first thing you do and the person you play as. I'm interested your thoughts on what's going
Zack.
on there. Yeah.
I think I'd kind of missed the discussion at the end of Remake about the whole, there's multiple timelines and the whole dog thing. I kind of knew vaguely of the dog thing, but I kind of thought, there's Zack at the end of Remake because people told me who he was, and I thought, it'll all be explained at the start of Rebirth.
Nope.
And so I'm just playing as Zack and like, wait, these characters look quite dead. Like, this isn't good. And then you go on and play as Cloud and Sephiroth, and I thought nothing of it. I thought they'll explain it later, and I'm just I don't know what to make of it. I'm assuming it's just multiple timelines. They're all dead in the other timeline, and that's in some way going to impact our timeline, and I'm interested how that will work. I don't fully understand why Zack has to look so much like Cloud.
Okay.
But the black-haired version, right?
Okay.
Like,
yeah.
So I'd like more clarity on that.
Okay.
And maybe I'll just end up, I can't fully remember, and I don't want to know what Zack's role was in the original Final Fantasy VII.
That's a spoiler for everything. So yeah,
right.
Don't look up anything to do with Zack when it comes to original Final Fantasy VII. I guess. But
I mean, I'm going to play Final Fantasy VII between Rebirth and the third game. That is my aim. So I'm happy to just wait until that moment to find that out, because it doesn't feel like this game's going to tell me much about it.
Well, I don't know. So you haven't had any additional Zack stuff, have you?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. Yeah, like, so Crisis Core was released in between. So they did a remake of Crisis Core, which was the PSP game that starred Zack, basically. And there's a lot of Zack backstory and stuff like that. I actually don't know if playing Crisis Core would help, because I don't know how much Crisis Core ties to people having knowledge of the original Final Fantasy VII. I guess it probably has to, because otherwise you don't have context. So it's interesting because, yeah, like, what they are doing is seemingly a timeline thing, and how they're going to tie it together, I have no idea, because none of this existed in the original, right? But I know exactly who Zack is and what the connection is and what is going on. Like, it's very interesting playing this, the perspective of someone who has played the original, because you know where things are going. There's an inevitability to it, because there are certain narrative beats that have to be hit, and certain things that are going to happen.
I like to always in JRPGs, it's my new aim is step back and try and work out what is my party trying to do right now?
What is the story actually doing right now?
Yeah, and I definitely lost this plot a number of times in Sea of Stars.
What right now, where you're at, what is your objective, do you think, currently?
It feels like, and the opening of the game after that Zack part is, Cloud doesn't like Sephiroth. Sephiroth killed his mum. We are going after Sephiroth. And I'm trying to remember the plot of Remake where we were trying to take down Shinra.
Yes.
But Sephiroth appeared. We're wanting to take down Shinra because we're trying to save the world, and it's the climate change argument.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes. Exactly.
Right. But then Rebirth, it feels like we are following the people following Sephiroth.
You're just following weird black-robed guys, right?
I don't fully understand how killing Sephiroth is going to save the planet, but I think that's what our party thinks is happening, because it feels weird that we're now on these weird terms with Shinra where we're both in agreement that we need to find Sephiroth.
Yeah.
I also don't fully understand why Shinra want to find I can't say the word Sephiroth.
So you just have to sing it. One Winged Angel, of course.
Right. And then there's this whole Wutai who seem like Shinra from the other side of the planet, and they're going to wage war with Shinra in some way, and that'll all be explained. So at the moment, it feels like we're going after Sephiroth, but it feels like it's more revenge for what Sephiroth has done, and less so about saving the planet, which was definitely the aim of the first game, and feels like we've lost. I feel like Barrett's the only one who mentions the planet anymore, whereas it felt like it was a bit more core to the plot of the first game. Am I on the right lines?
I guess so, yeah. Like, they're basically following these men who are just walking in a line, seemingly following a trail that Sephiroth is left, but I don't think they've made it too clear to, like, people who haven't played the original. Like, why? Like, why are we doing any of this, and what are we doing? And I think that is part of the problem of the pacing of, like, well, now we're going to do some mini games on the beach and get enough points to buy bikinis for the girls, and then we're going to go off and do stuff on the beach. Like,
I am excited about the beach.
It's great. Honestly, one of my favorite parts of the game. There's like no combat, nothing. It's just character moments and interactions and running around using a Segway. Like, it's
nice.
It's a good time. It's really enjoyable, actually. And that's the thing. Like, moment to moment, I do really enjoy my time with this game. I think it's just, I get to a point where I'm like, oh, I just want to keep moving with this, as opposed to feeling like I'm going to be stuck in this area. Like, because I think there's an understanding of like how long chapters end up being, and I'm like, wow, I still have 4 more, and each of these chapters is going to be like probably 5-6 hours each. It
sounds like it's hard to do the open world stuff, not even doing all of it, but doing most of it, and beating this game in under 80 hours.
Agreed. Yeah, and I think that's a problem that happens with a lot of games like this, where you get to a point eventually, and I think this happens for me a lot generally, where when I first play a game like this, I will do everything. I'll be like, I'm clearing up everything, and then eventually you get to that fatigue point where you're like, okay, I've done a lot, but like now I just want to keep going with the main stuff to see where it goes, and that curiosity about the main story overtakes your impulse to go and like clean stuff up.
If they don't give you any main story to be curious about, that opens up the open world more.
Look, I'll say that like where I'm at now, I didn't finish that cut. I messaged Bally before we started being like, I'm just watching a cutscene, I'll wait till it finishes. I realized about 5 minutes into that cutscene, this cutscene's not ending. The cutscene's going to be half an hour. Like, this is I'm gonna have to wait on this. So I paused it and put it into rest mode.
Okay.
So I actually am right now very excited to get back to that cutscene because some stuff was happening. I'm like, what's going on? Very interested. So I am at the point now where I'm like, oh yeah, I think I just there's like Cosmo Canyon is a part of the original. It's one of my favorite areas of the original, and I know there's a bunch of lore drop stuff that happens there. And so that is a bit of a North Star for me right now. It's like, I know if I get to Cosmo Canyon, I'm going to get some real good payoff. And I feel so close to it that I'm like, I just want to go there. I just want to go there.
You can always
right
come back to the open world stuff, right? Like
I see
probably
that,
won't want to,
but I won't want. I know myself. I won't want to. Like when I think I do side stuff in a game in order to help myself be more prepared, more leveled up, all that stuff.
It's something I've trained myself into as well.
Yep. Which once I've finished the game, I no longer see a point to it, and I think that's maybe I don't know, something just me when it comes to playing games. But I never see a reason to go back because like I've done the most important thing, which is fighting the final boss and finishing it. So there isn't anything, unless it's a narrative thing that I really want to take a look at. It doesn't kind of like attract me to go back in that way. So I do think that once it's pulled, once the leash is off the dog, whatever the fuck you want to call it, I'm just not gonna. It's not gonna happen. I'm not gonna go back. So, but yeah, I don't know. Like, because you are someone who is very into story in games, and it's a good driving point for you for games. So like, how do you feel like the fact that this? It's giving you stuff, but it's not really giving you like a core thing to be following necessarily.
Yeah, I think the story and like the mainline story is not what's driving me at the moment. I think it really is the locations actually, and like I was just waxing lyrical about Upper Junon. Like that was just fantastic.
My goodness, wait till you get to Gold Saucer. I think
right.
As someone who I know loves theme parks, let me tell you, you are going to fucking love Gold Saucer. What they have done with that is amazing. It's so cool. And yeah, you're going to have a great time there. You're going to be like, wow, this is insane what they've done. And, you know, likewise with Costa del Sol, I think it's a really beautiful location. And the locations are really like I said, they're the bread and butter of this segment of the game, because you are going into the open world and seeing all these different places and the variety of people and situations and like what is society outside of this one kind of very industrialized city. What is happening?
And I definitely, it's funny you say theme parks. I was going to say this game just oozes Disney. Like it feels so, not just its production, but even like a town like Calm is just incredibly Disney fantasy.
There's a fairy tale aspect to it.
Yeah, like the budget has gone into the architecture in the opening little town is like insane. Like it looks so impressive. Like I
think it says a lot that I didn't remember what Calm looked like from the original, so I went back and looked at it, and I'm like, yeah, like they just basically made up an entire town, because it's like there's barely any of Calm in the original.
And that like kind of clock tower that you're in, and then there's like that cutscene that all ensues. It like that clock tower and that whole town is actually very, very, very Kingdom Hearts. Talking of Disney,
oh boy, yeah, I think. Brace yourself, Bally, because Tetsuya Nomura worked on this game, and I think that Kingdom Hearts energy, that, you know, when you talk to me about the end of Kingdom Hearts 3 and you're like, I don't know what the fuck is going on. This boss is hard and I didn't understand anything. I have a feeling that's the end of this video game. I have a feeling the end of this video, because the way people are talking about it is like, I don't know what the fuck happened. That doesn't make any sense. Like, especially for someone who's not played the original, like even people who've played the original, like, I don't know what the fuck just happened. So
I totally, and I maybe felt a bit like that at the end of Remake, but explainers online did make more sense to the end of Remake, whereas the difference between that and Kingdom Hearts is I've watched Kingdom Hearts explainers and they don't make sense. They don't make sense. I've watched multiple, like it just makes zero sense. And
Waypoint did an entire podcast series about Kingdom Hearts lore and trying to explain it, and like, let me tell you, that was none of it makes sense. It's just
stupid. It's stupid stuff, and it's just kind of like got Mickey Mouse on it. And yes, I love the Disney worlds, but I can't claim to know anything about how Kingdom Hearts 3 relates to anything. I just really enjoyed those Disney worlds.
Yeah.
But aside from that, yeah, I love the locations. In terms of plot, it's not even the main plot, and I'm intrigued by like the whole Shinra Wutai relationship, and I guess that's all a very beat by beat aspect of the first game. And I say first game, I should say 7 original.
The way this game is paced, like I feel like Wutai is going to be a third game thing, basically.
Fair enough. And I'm prepared for that. I don't mind cliffhangers, to be honest. Like I finished Halo 2 and thought it's a great game. I'm prepared to play Halo 3. I don't need...
Fortunately for you didn't have to wait the 4 years that everyone else did for Halo 3.
And I probably obviously will with this game, but I don't really mind a cliffhanger at the end of a second segment of 3. Like, that's not the end of the world.
As long as the cliffhanger makes sense, which...
yes,
I don't know if this will or not. We'll see.
What I would like a little more resolution on is like just the random stuff that happens aside from that I don't know whether it's side stuff or main stuff. And I messaged you about this, but so one of them is like when you complete a little open world area, you get this samurai that just like... Oh, yeah. I'd have no idea what that guy's about. I don't think he was in Remake. There's no context given at all. I'm very confused. And I've seen him twice now because I've beaten 2 open world areas. I'd like some resolution on that by the end of the game. Who knows?
Yeah, I don't know if we'll get any of that. I think I know what's going on with that, but even I am a little kind of like not blind, but like there's a so you know the guy in Fort Condor with the arms.
Yes.
Like the 6 arms. I think that's the same guy, I want to say.
Okay. Yeah. No, fair enough.
That character is called Gilgamesh. He is originally in Final Fantasy V, and he's in 14. He's kind of a recurring character across this, like kind of like Moogles and Chocobos are in every game.
Yeah.
I don't think Gilgamesh is in every Final Fantasy, but I think he's a recurring character within Final Fantasy as a franchise. So I don't know what they're doing with... if that is him in this game, because it looked like Wutai, so it looks like they're teasing stuff for Wutai.
Right.
So because Wutai is essentially like, if we think of Midgar and the Western continent as like USA, Wutai is like an Asia, China equivalent essentially.
Interesting. Okay.
So yeah, I think that's kind of what that setting implies.
That's really interesting because there's a lot of like very Japanese stuff in Midgar and kind of the continent we're currently on, but. Anyway, interesting. Yeah, and then the other one was, it seems there's a lot more narratively to Queen's Blood than I'd initially thought. Yeah,
what the fuck? That cutscene? Did you get that cutscene?
Yes.
Where it suddenly, like, I was like, what the fuck is going on?
That little town off to the eastern Junon, that guy.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, you fight that guy, because there's another, because once you beat a certain number of people, then you get to fight, like, a master or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I fought that guy, and then, like, it fucking glitched out the screen like a VHS, and I was like, what the fuck is happening? And there's just some guy in a room on a table, like, losing his mind. I was like, what is going on here? This is mad.
Yeah, so I'd like some payoff for that in this game, and assuming Queen's Blood doesn't come into the third game, which it probably won't.
They probably will. But how popular it is. They're going to make a whole game. I think they're going to make a spin-off of it. They're going to put it on mobile. Of course they are.
Yeah. So I'd like to know, like, there's just a couple of weird things. I'm just like, I don't need that much resolution on the main plot. But honestly, the amount of plot I'm getting with, like, Junon and Wutai and stuff, like, I that's fine for me. Like,
I guess it's more world building than anything else, right?
Yes.
Is what it is. It's like that entire sequence in Junon is like, okay, how do the soldier and the military work here? What's the situation with regular civilians? Like, I do love how much incidental dialogue there is in this game where you just walk up to somebody. Like, there's that town you were talking about with the card player. There's someone there, a teacher teaching a class on, like, Junon as a place and the history with Shinra and how the Junon used to be a flotilla of ships with a city built on top of the flotilla.
Yes.
And there's a teacher, literally, like, you can stand there for like a minute and this teacher just tells you history, and it's like an incidental conversation, like, and you run past, and this was the same in Remake, you run past people and you just hear cacophony of noises of people chatting. But if you take each of those individual conversations, there's a lot of interesting world building going on with those conversations.
It's really cool. As someone who doesn't know about the original game 7, it's really interesting. Like, it's really impressive.
It's part of the joy, not the joy, but like I do enjoy doing the live streams because there's a little mechanical thing in my brain that feels good when I pick up 100 items at once, and then there's a little mechanical thing in in my brain that feels good when I just hit triangle to QTE. But the benefit of the life springs is you get a little lore entry about that area, which I also think is quite good. And a lot of those things are things you could contextually pick up on in the original, but are not explicitly stated. And so them building out the world more and actually giving more context to that stuff, I think is really good in this. So
I know you didn't enjoy Fort Condor. I think my equivalent is probably the Moogle houses, the Mog houses.
Oh, sure, yeah, those kind of suck.
Are they Is it Mogs or Moogles?
They're Moogles. I think it's called Mog House.
Mog House. They're a bit. It feels like Super Monkey Ball.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's just like not good.
It's very fluffy. Like of all the fluffy stuff, it's maybe the fluffiest.
It's kind of like Mario Kart in some ways, with like the weapons.
It feels like Mario Party. Like, and I think that is my thing. Like, there is a Mario Party mini game feel to a lot of these mini games, and I think that's. Like, from a control standpoint, some of them just feel a little underbaked. And
see, I wouldn't put Queen's Blood and Fort Condor in that.
No, because those I wouldn't call those mini games. I'd call those side games. Almost, right?
Yes.
Like
I agree.
They're like They are differentiated enough. There's like an entire mechanic set and tutorialization built around those that isn't just one screen telling you the controls, right? Which is a lot of the other stuff in this game is. It's one screen. It's like, okay, how do I do this? Okay, you run, and the Moogle will run away from you. Like, that's it. that's the idea behind it. So, yeah. That stuff just feels a little superfluous, and you get some benefits for doing it, and you get the Moogle medals from towers and stuff like that. But it's fine, I think. And I think my biggest worry of skipping open world stuff is that my levels won't keep pace and that I will be under-leveled.
There's always an easier mode we can drop to if we have to.
There is, exactly.
Which would feel like a little bit of a kick in the teeth, because I really enjoyed the challenge and difficulty of Remake. I felt like it never...
It's part of the satisfaction of the game is that the combat is challenging, right?
It's challenging, but it never got over the top, and... there were a few bosses I did a few times in Remake, but I don't remember it being... crazy hard. And as someone who's not played a ton of JRPGs, in particular 3D JRPGs, that was very satisfying. So I'm hoping Rebirth is a similar challenge level, and so far it feels similar-ish, but we'll see.
Yeah, I like this game. I think like it's not the love I have for Remake. I think Remake is such a singular thing in terms of its like its focus, and like there is fluff in there for sure, but I think there is such a narrative focus and a discovery of like the systems and mechanics that first time I played that was just very, very special. I even think Intermission Intergrade is really good fun. Like that Yuffie intermission I thought was excellent, like learning a brand new character, and again very linear, very focused, just worked for me. And I think the inherent bloat that comes with AAA open world that they have presented here, I think it flattens it out. It makes it less kind of, it does less impact, I would say, is what it is. I feel like I'm gonna finish it. I'm gonna go through it. I'm gonna see the story, but I feel like the final part of this game, if the third entry kind of goes back to a more of a remake approach, I think I'd be happier about that. I don't think they can. I don't think they will, because this open world stuff clearly far more popular with a wider audience, and I think it's going to probably stay. So yeah, we'll see how it goes, but so far this is definitely an enjoyable game. For me, if we're talking about like other new games I played this year, Prince of Persia and Infinite Wealth are like leagues above it for me personally.
Wow.
Yeah, so we'll see. Hopefully I keep enjoying it and I don't get too bogged down with the other stuff. But yeah, it's good. It's a good game. It's great.
I think it's up there with Prince of Persia maybe for me at the moment. And I think I'm having more of an impact with these new locations perhaps than you. I don't know whether that's maybe because I've not played the original game, but like I said, like Upper Junon and new locations, and I really enjoyed Remake. I didn't get the impact of new locations constantly. That's because of the nature of Midgar. Like you saw the bottom, you saw the top, and then you saw the Honeybee Inn, and you saw Shinra Tower. That was cool.
I think I get a different impact, which is like seeing this thing that I know from a very pre-rendered, pixelated 1990 whatever kind of style into this big blown out mega thing. I think for me, I think it wears off far quicker than it does for you. I think you just get very enamored with that stuff, and it carries you through. Whereas for me, I'm like, oh wow, and then like 10 minutes later, I'm like, okay, this is familiar now. And so it doesn't have that kind of, it can't carry me through in the same way. I think cool as it is, and I think it is, and they've done great work to make these locations really come to life. And it's like, wow, this looks very nice, but eventually you're just doing the same stuff that you've been doing, and it's like, okay, as pretty as this looks,
and I wouldn't say the actions I'm doing in these locations are that interesting. It's just as a spectacle, this game's just doing something for me a little stronger than Remake. And I think the impact of the combat in the first game is maybe the highlight. Like there's maybe nothing quite as great as when I played that demo of Remake, and it was like, wow, because I was kind of on the fence. Like, I've never played the original 7. Am I going to really jump into a 40-hour 3D JRPG? Like, this is insane. And I just loved that demo so much. I was sold and played it and loved it. And, I'm loving this game so far. So I'm keen to push on. Like, I've moved house now. So hopefully I'll get more playtime in the next while to crack on with this. And I hopefully it doesn't hang over me like Elden Ring has for 2 years. Like, I'm gonna crack on and get to the end of this game. It's a very good game so far.
Yeah, good stuff. Cool. Well, that is going to close us out for this episode. We will be back for another Patreon episode in April, I guess. I have no idea what that's going to look like because I'll be in Japan and stuff like that. But we'll get the schedule in place.
Rebirth before you go to Japan, then, is that the
yes,
plan?
Definitely before I go to Japan. I won't finish it before. Talking to folks at work, and I was like, are you going to try and beat Rebirth before we go to GDC? And I don't think I'll be able to do that because that's just, it's too soon. But yeah, I'll 100% beat it before I go to Japan. Yeah. I'll have it squared away. Nice. And then I'll move on to the third big RPG that I haven't played yet, which is Persona 3 Reload. So yeah, it's a year of giant long games.
We'll see if we're closer to like 60 hours or 80 hours, because we both might dry up on the open world stuff and try and hit that 60 closer to it. Maybe.
We'll see. I think I'll do little bits of it going forward, but I'm definitely not gonna 100% anything at this point in time. And I think that's probably healthier and better pacing and all that good stuff. But I'm excited to go back to it. I'm going to play it right now. As soon as we're off this call, I'm going to go back to that cutscene and see what's going on, because I want to see what's happening. So, it still has me. I'm very, very excited to continue and see the twists they have and where it takes the story. So we'll I'm sure check back in on it next time. But until then, thanks everybody for listening, and thanks so much for supporting on Patreon. It's always very nice. Very helpful, and be back soon with some more chat about video games. Until then, thanks for listening, folks. We'll see you soon. Bye bye.